Tonight, we're breaking down the complete history of the House of Black, the darkest and most ancient pure-blood lineage in the wizarding world. This story has many layers, but I'll keep the narration soft and calm so you can still drift off. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. A house tucked away behind the mundane facade of London, invisible to the eyes of those it deems unworthy. This is number 12 Grimmauld Place, and it is the physical manifestation of a legacy built on pride, power, and a devastating commitment to the preservation of blood. Within these walls, the air is thick with the scent of old parchment, silver polish, and the lingering chill of dark magic that refuses to dissipate. On the wall of the drawing room hangs a tapestry, a sprawling, magical map of a family tree that stretches back to the Middle Ages. Its golden threads weave a story of calculated marriages, strategic alliances, and a fanatical devotion to a motto that would eventually become their undoing: Toujours pur, always pure. To understand the wizarding world is to understand the House of Black. They were not merely a family, they were an institution. They were the self-appointed royalty of magical Britain, tracing their roots back through the centuries to a time when magic was raw and unchecked. Some historians suggest they arrived with the Norman Conquest, crossing the Channel from medieval France, alongside other names that would eventually form the backbone of the wizarding aristocracy, names like Malfoy and Lestrange. From that moment on, the Blacks dedicated themselves to a singular goal: the elevation of the magical race above all others, and the elevation of the House of Black above all other magical families. But the story of the Blacks is not just a chronicle of wealth and influence. It is a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. It is a story of two brothers who shared the same nursery, but ended up on opposite sides of a war that tore their world apart. It is a story of three sisters whose choices would define the fates of the next generation. It is the story of a family that burned its own children out of its history to maintain an illusion of perfection. When you look at that tapestry, you see the scorched holes where names used to be. Those black spots are more than just gaps in a lineage. They are the scars of a family that chose ideology over love and purity over humanity. The House of Black was central to the infamous list known as the Sacred 28, a directory compiled in the 1930s that identified the families who had supposedly maintained their magical purity. To the Blacks, this list was a holy text. They used it as a guide for their children's futures, ensuring that the web of pure blood connections remained tight and impenetrable. They were related to almost everyone who mattered in the upper echelons of wizarding society. To be a Black was to be born with a silver wand in your hand and a heavy crown of expectations on your head. But as the 20th century progressed, the world began to change, and the House of Black found itself clutching to a past that was rapidly slipping away. The stakes of this history are immense. The rise and fall of Lord Voldemort cannot be fully understood without examining the role of this family. They provided him with his most loyal lieutenants and his most tragic victims. They gave him a sanctuary in the form of their ideology, and they gave him the very tools he used to spread terror. Yet, within this same family, we find the seeds of his eventual downfall. The rebellion of a single son and the secret sacrifice of another would prove to be the cracks in the foundation that Voldemort never saw coming. The House of Black is where the light and the dark of the wizarding world collide most violently. How did a family so obsessed with its own survival end up extinct in the male line? How did the motto "always pure" lead to a descent into madness and isolation? And what really happened behind the closed doors of Grimmauld Place during the dark years of the First and Second Wizarding Wars? To answer these questions, we must look beyond the names and the titles. We must look at the people behind the portraits, the mothers who valued blood over life, the fathers who demanded absolute obedience, and the children who had to decide whether to follow the path laid out for them or to forge a new one, even if it meant being erased forever. We are about to embark on a journey through the centuries, from the fog-drenched battlefields of medieval Britain to the quiet, dusty corners of a house that has forgotten how to be a home. We will examine the lives of Sirius and Regulus, the sisters Bellatrix, Andromeda and Narcissa, and the ancestors who set the stage for their dramatic lives. We will uncover the secrets of their magic, the depths of their prejudices, and the surprising ways their legacy continues to ripple through the wizarding world today. This is the complete history of the noble and most ancient House of Black. It is a story of shadows and silver, of blood and betrayal, and ultimately, of the high cost of trying to remain pure in a world that is beautifully, hopelessly complex. The silence in the halls of is not a peaceful one. It is a heavy, expectant silence, as if the house itself is waiting for a master who will never return. The portraits on the walls still whisper, their painted eyes following anyone who dares to walk the corridors. They remember the days of grand balls and hushed political meetings. They remember the sound of laughter before it was replaced by the screams of the mad and the weeping of the bereaved. The House of Black was a fortress, but it was also a prison. Every silver heirloom and every velvet curtain was a reminder of the status they had to uphold, no matter the cost. As we go deeper into this history, we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be noble? Is it found in the antiquity of one's name, or in the courage of one's actions? The Blacks claim nobility as a birthright, but their history is a long list of ignoble acts disguised as tradition. They removed the Muggles, the Squibs, and the blood traitors from their sight, believing that by erasing the evidence of their supposed failures, they could maintain their greatness. But you cannot erase the truth. The truth lived in the basement with the house elves, it lived in the hearts of the children who ran away, and it lived in the very magic that eventually began to fade from their line. The irony of the House of Black is that their obsession with purity was their greatest weakness. By narrowing their world to a handful of acceptable families, they ensured their own genetic and social stagnation. They married cousins to keep the bloodline clean, only to find that they were breeding a specific kind of instability. The madness of Bellatrix Lestrange was not an anomaly. It was the result of generations of a family turning inward, refusing to let the outside world in. They were a house divided against itself, a house that valued the concept of family more than the actual members of that family. But even in the darkness, there were those who looked toward the light. Sirius Black, the boy who refused to hate. Andromeda Tonks, the woman who chose love over a name. Regulus Black, the youth who realized too late that he had served a monster and gave his life to make it right. These individuals are the true legacy of the House of Black, though their family would have denied it. They are the ones who proved that blood is not destiny, and that even the oldest and darkest of houses can produce something truly extraordinary. Tonight, we will look at the timeline of this family, from its earliest recorded members to the final generation that saw the end of the Black name. We will explore the political power they wielded in the Ministry of Magic and the dark secrets they kept in their private libraries. We will see how they influenced the Malfoys, the Lestranges, and the Lupins. We will witness the slow decay of their grand ambition and the final, quiet end of an era. The story of the House of Black is a warning, a mystery, and a masterpiece of world-building that reveals the very heart of the Harry Potter universe. As the candles flicker and the shadows lengthen, let us step through the threshold of history. Let us peel back the layers of myth and propaganda that the Blacks built around themselves. Let us look at the tapestry not as a map of greatness, but as a record of a family's struggle with its own identity. The journey is long and the path is winding, but the story of the noble and most ancient House of Black is one that deserves to be told in its entirety. It is time to uncover the truth of the lineage that claimed to be always pure, but was, in the end, profoundly human. We begin in the distant past, where the roots of the tree first took hold in the soil of Britain. We look at the founders who established the family's wealth and the early patriarchs who dictated the rules of their society, the formation of the ideology that would define them for 1,000 years. From the medieval courts to the Victorian drawing rooms, the Blacks were always there, lurking in the background of history, shaping the world to fit their vision. But as we will see, the world has a way of resisting even the most powerful of families. The House of Black is a study in contrast. It is the beauty of a silver locket and the horror of the curse that protects it. It is the dignity of an ancient name and the shame of the secrets it hides. It is the loyalty of a house elf and the betrayal of a brother. To understand the Blacks is to understand the duality of the magical world itself. the constant struggle between the desire for order and the necessity of change. So settle in, let the room grow dark, and prepare to enter the world of the most complex family in wizarding history. The story is about to begin. 1066. The Norman Conquest changed the entire fabric of Britain, but in the shadows, a different kind of invasion was taking place. A migration of magical families who would come to define the aristocracy of the wizarding world for 1,000 years. Among the knights, the soldiers, and the clerics who crossed the Channel with William the Conqueror, there were wizards, and among those wizards, there were the first to bear the name Black. Tracing the Black family origins back to medieval France is a task of careful speculation, as the family themselves were masters of obscuring their own history. They emerged fully formed, it seems, wielding their power and their purity like a weapon. They arrived in Britain alongside other powerful dynasties, the Lestranges, forming a tight-knit block of Norman blood that stood apart from the native Saxon wizards. They brought with them the old world's magic, its rigid hierarchies, and a deep, abiding belief in the sanctity of blood. But more than their land or their magic, the Blacks brought with them a title, the noble and most ancient House of Black. This was not mere ceremony, it was a claim to wizarding royalty. In a world without a singular magical monarch, the Blacks declared themselves the closest thing to it. They looked upon the Muggle monarchy with a kind of clinical disdain, believing their own lineage was older, purer, and imbued with a magic that made them the true sovereigns of this island. Their blood was their crown. Their history was their charter. Acquiring ancestral lands was the next step in solidifying this mythos of power. They did not simply build a home. They built a fortress for their legacy. The early architectural influence of the Black family can be seen in their strategic acquisition of property throughout London and the countryside. These were not merely houses. They were magical strongholds, bought or built, enchanted to be hidden from Muggle eyes, commanding locations that spoke of influence and permanence. The most significant of these, the townhouse at 12 Grimmauld Place, would eventually become the heart of the Black dynasty. It stands as a monument to their values, imposing, hidden, ancient. Its very structure, a gloomy Victorian facade on a medieval foundation, mirrors the family itself. Layers of history, secrets built upon secrets, walls that remember every whispered vow and every act of betrayal. The foundations were laid, the lands were claimed, the name was spoken with a reverence that bordered on fear, but a name is not a legacy, a title is not a soul. The Blacks needed something more, a philosophy, a binding oath that would define every generation to come. They looked to their oldest principles, to the very reason they had crossed the Channel in the first place, and they carved it into their crest, into their identity, into their very bones. A simple promise, a terrible curse. Toujours pur, always pure. How that phrase, that beautiful and devastating idea, was born from these ancient stones and ancient blood. That is the story of how a dynasty began to turn against itself. So the Black family had planted their flag in British soil, their name already heavy with the promise of ancient power and pure lineage. But a name alone was not enough. They needed a creed, a single phrase that would crystallize their identity and justify their isolation. That phrase, as you likely know, was always pure. 2 words, French, not English. And that choice of language is the first clue to the depth of the ideology they were constructing. Why French? Because in the medieval wizarding world, French was the tongue of courtly magic, of the oldest wizarding dynasties. The Blacks, having traced their roots back to France, wanted that continental prestige. But more than that, is not just a motto, it is a command. It is a promise that never ends. The word, always, forever, perpetually, implies that purity is not a state you achieve once and then maintain passively. It is an active, continuous battle against time, against genetics, against the very world outside your bloodline. There is no rest. There is no completion. The family must always be purifying itself, always policing its edges. And that policing began with the most intimate decision a family can make: whom to marry. The early Blacks, those first generations who settled in Britain, already understood that blood would dilute if you let it flow outward. So they turned inward. Cousin marriage, which in the Muggle world had long been a practice among royalty to consolidate power, became the Black family's core strategy for preventing what they called blood pollution. They saw themselves as wizarding royalty, and they adopted the same methods of genetic enclosure. First cousins, second cousins, even uncle and niece pairings were arranged with cold calculation. The family tree began to twist into a knot, each branch curling back to meet itself. The linguistic weight of also carries a hidden irony. The phrase is aspirational, not descriptive. Always pure implies that purity is a condition you must constantly strive for, because deep down, you fear it has already been lost. The Blacks were not pure. They were obsessed with the idea of never becoming impure. That distinction is everything. The motto is not a fact, it is a threat. It was burned into the tapestry, carved into the mantelpieces of 12 Grimmauld Place, whispered at every betrothal. It created a system of exclusion so rigid that anyone who failed to live up to it was not merely disowned, they were erased, burnt off the family tree. Their names vanished as if they had never existed, and so the mandate for genetic isolation took root. The early cousins who married were not just preserving blood, they were building a fortress of shared ancestry. Every child born of those unions was more black than the last, more intertwined, more fragile. Because purity, when pursued to its extreme, becomes a trap. Inbreeding weakens magic, just as it weakens bodies. The very thing they worshipped, pure magical lineage, was ironically the thing most likely to produce squibs, madness, and weakness. But they could not see that. They saw only the motto, always pure. No exceptions. This obsession did not emerge overnight. It was nurtured over centuries, each generation reinforcing the dogma until it became the family's very breath. And by the time the wizarding world began to formally categorize these families, the Blacks had already perfected their doctrine of exclusion. They would become the cornerstone of a list that would define wizarding royalty for generations. A list that would name only 28 families as truly pure. And the Blacks, with their motto and their cousin weddings, stood at its very center. But how did that list come to be? And what did it mean to be counted among the sacred 28? That story, the story of the list itself, would reshape the entire wizarding social order, and it begins with a witch who decided to publish a book. The motto was never meant to be a quiet aspiration whispered over family dinners. It was a declaration of war against the very possibility of impurity. And nowhere did that war take on a more coldly strategic, ruthlessly political form than in the 1930s, when a book appeared that would redefine the social order of magical Britain. That book was the Pure Blood Directory, and at its heart sat the House of Black. You have to understand the atmosphere of that decade. Wizarding society, like any society, thrived on gossip, on alliances, on the subtle calculus of who was worthy of a dinner invitation and who belonged in the shadows. Pure-blood families had always kept mental ledgers of lineage, but there was no single, authoritative document that codified who was truly of the ancient stock. That changed when a publisher, some say it was a collective of pure-blood editors, others whisper it was a single anonymous compiler with a very long memory, released the first edition of the Pure Blood Directory. It listed exactly 28 families that, according to its editors, remained entirely pure. No Muggle blood had entered their lines for as many generations as records could reach. Now, the Blacks did not simply appear on that list. They essentially curated it. The family had spent centuries compiling their own genealogical records, burning out the names of those who married Muggles or produced squibs, and carefully controlling which marriages were recorded in the official family tapestry. When the directory was being assembled, the Blacks, specifically the patriarch of the era, a man named Arcturus Black, who was Sirius and Regulus's grandfather, saw an opportunity. They could use this list to elevate themselves above their rivals and to demote families they considered beneath them. How did they manipulate it? The process was quiet, almost elegant. The Blacks were related to nearly every other pure-blood family in Britain through a vast web of intermarriage. But not all ties were equal. Some families, like the Longbottoms and the Weasleys, had marriages with half-bloods or distant Muggle relations that the Blacks knew about and could have chosen to overlook. Instead, They made sure those connections were scrutinized, magnified, and ultimately used to exclude those families from the sacred circle of the 28. The Weasleys, for instance, were considered a disgrace by the Blacks, not because they were any less ancient, but because they had embraced Muggle-friendly attitudes. And so, in the directory, the Weasley name was omitted, while the Blacks themselves were listed as the very model of purity, the standard against which all others were judged. The result was a political power grab disguised as a genealogy project. By being perceived as the purest of the 28, the Blacks claimed a form of wizarding royalty that carried real weight. They could broker marriages, secure government positions for their allies, and blackmail rivals by threatening to reveal a drop of Muggle ancestry. The directory became a tool of social engineering. If your family was not on the list, you were labelled a blood traitor or worse. If you were on the list, you owed the Blacks a debt of gratitude, and that debt was always called in. But the list was also a lie. The Blacks knew that no family, not even theirs, had truly pure magical ancestry going back centuries. There had been the occasional squib whose name was quietly erased, the marriage to a Muggle-born that was never recorded. The Tapestry at 12 Grimmauld Place, which we will explore in the next chapter, is not a document of truth. It is a document of every burned-out name is a confession that purity was always a convenient fiction. Yet the fiction was powerful enough to shape the lives of everyone who touched it. The Pure Blood Directory cemented the Blacks as the arbiters of wizarding aristocracy for decades. It gave them the authority to decide who belonged and who was cast out, and it set the stage for the tragic divisions that would tear the family apart in the generations to come. Because when you build a throne on a lie, the cracks are inevitable. Those cracks would become visible in the very house where the tapestry hung, where the portraits screamed their condemnations, and where a house elf named Kreacher would one day carry a locket that held the weight of a family's entire delusion. That house, 12 Grimmauld Place, was not just a home. It was a fortress built to keep the shadows in, and in the next chapter, we will walk through its dark halls. The Sacred 28 had elevated the Black family to the very peak of wizarding society, but social standing requires a stage. And for the Blacks, that stage was not a remote castle hidden in the moors, nor a sprawling estate in the countryside. It was a narrow, gloomy London townhouse, squeezed between two perfectly ordinary Muggle buildings. A fortress of shadows, built not in stone and battlements, but in curses, secrets, and the weight of centuries. You might wonder why a family so obsessed with purity and ancient lineage would choose to live in the heart of a bustling Muggle city. The answer lies in the nature of their power. The Blacks did not want to hide. They wanted to be seen, to be feared, to be the center of every political and social current. London was the stage where wizarding decisions were made, where the ministry sat, where connections were forged over tea and whispered deals. A manor tucked away in the Highlands would have isolated them from the very world they sought to control. So they planted their flag in a street that, to Muggles, appeared to be a row of nondescript Victorian houses. But to those who knew, number 12 was a monument. The history of the townhouse stretches back further than the building itself. The land had been in the Black family since the early 18th century, when the first of their line to settle in London purchased a small parcel and erected a house that would grow darker with each generation. Over the centuries, as the family wealth swelled and their paranoia deepened, they expanded the property, absorbing adjacent buildings and sealing them into a single, sprawling labyrinth. By the time Walburga Black took ownership, the house had become less a home and more a vault. A vault for blood, for memory, for the unyielding doctrine of purity, and like any vault, it was sealed with layer upon layer of protective enchantments. The most obvious was the Fidelius charm, which made the house unplottable and impossible to find unless you were told the secret by its keeper. But that was only the first skin. Beneath it, ancient wards hummed in the walls, spells so old that their incantations had been forgotten, their power sustained only by the Black family bloodline. These wards actively repelled intruders, but they also did something more insidious. They monitored the loyalty of those inside. If a visitor harbored even a flicker of disloyalty to the House of Black, the house would feel it. The door to the drawing room at 12 Grimmauld Place does not creak so much as sigh, as if the house itself is reluctant to let you see what is inside. We have already walked through the shadowed corridors, felt the weight of the enchantments pressed into the very stones, and endured the shrieks of Walburga Black's portrait. But this room holds something far more intimate than a screaming canvas. It holds the family's own judgment, woven into fabric and frozen in time. On the far wall, stretching from the high ceiling nearly to the floor, hangs the tapestry of the noble and most ancient House of Black. At first glance, it appears to be a massive, faded family tree, its threads dulled by age, its edges fraying. But look closer and you see that it is alive with a low, latent magic. The gold embroidery that spells out the names shimmers faintly, as though the threads are still breathing. This is not a passive record. The tapestry is enchanted to chronicle every birth, every marriage, every death, weaving itself anew with each generation. When a child is born with enough black blood, their name appears as if stitched by invisible hands, the letters forming in a slow, deliberate embroidery that takes days to complete. The fabric reacts to the family's own verdict on its members, and that is where the true darkness lies. Scattered across the tapestry are patches of scorched fabric, blackened holes where names once glittered. Some are small, neat burns the size of a nut. Others are ragged and large, as if a great anger had scarred the cloth. These are the marks of a ritual that the Black family called burning out, when a member defied the family's code, when they married a muggle or a muggle-born, when they ran away, when they refused to uphold the sacred purity of the bloodline. The matriarch of the house would stand before the tapestry and perform a ritual of severance. She would speak the name of the offender aloud, and the tapestry would respond. The threads around that name would begin to smoulder, a thin curl of smoke rising as the fabric grew hot. The golden letters would writhe, as if trying to escape, before they blackened and crumbled into ash. The heat was not a physical flame, but a curse, a magical excision that removed the person not only from the tapestry, but from the family's magical identity. The burned hole left behind was permanent, a scorch mark that could never be rewoven, a wound that the family chose to keep open as a warning. To witness the ritual was to understand the depth of their cruelty. The matriarch would stand in silence, her wand pointed at the tapestry, her face often expressionless. The smoke carried a faint smell of sulphur and old parchment. When the burn was complete, the name was gone, but the space it had occupied remained a void, a little tomb in the fabric. The surviving names around it seemed to press closer together, as though the tapestry itself was trying to fill the gap, but it never truly healed. The burn remained a scar, a map of every exile the family had ever pronounced, and so the tapestry becomes a document not of who the Blacks were, but of what they were willing to destroy. The names that survived are those who towed the line. Bellatrix Black, who married Rodolphus Lestrange and became one of the most feared Death Eaters. Narcissa Black, who married Lucius Malfoy and continued the pure blood traditions with cold grace. Regulus Black, who joined the Death Eaters and, at least in the family's view, redeemed himself by dying in service of the Dark Lord. Their names remain intact, golden and pristine, but all around them are the voids. The largest burn is the one that marks the exile of Sirius Black, who ran away as a teenager and never looked back. That hole is angry and wide, as if the tapestry itself recoiled from his defiance. Next to it, close enough to show how recently the rift was made, is the burn for Andromeda Black, who married Muggle-born Ted Tonks. Her name was removed with surgical precision, leaving a neat oval of blackened fabric between the names of her sisters, a silent reminder that she had once stood there. Then there are the older burns, dating back decades or even centuries. Names of squibs, of those who married Muggles, of those who simply refused to uphold the family's expectations. Each one tells a story of a life that was deemed unacceptable. The tapestry is a chronicle of the family's values, written in ash. The Blacks valued purity above all else, but they also valued the performance of purity. It was not enough to be pure of blood. You had to be seen to be pure. You had to marry the right person, denounce the wrong ones, and maintain the public face of an untouchable lineage. The burns are the evidence of those who failed that performance. And yet, even in its ruined state, the tapestry is a powerful magical artifact. It is not merely a record, but a living link to the family's ancient magic. The enchantments that animate it are tied to the bloodline itself. When a burn is made, it severs not just a name, but a magical connection. The exiled member loses any claim to the family's protections, their name erased from the wards of Grimmauld Place, their magical signature cut from the ancient spells that guarded the house. In a way, the tapestry was the family's book of judgment, and the ritual of burning out was an act of magical violence as much as a symbolic one. The drawing room is quiet now, the tapestry hanging undisturbed, its burns collecting dust. The family that created it is all but gone. The names that remain are only ghosts, stitched in gold, watching over a house that no longer belongs to them. But the tapestry endures, a map of blood and ash, a silent witness to a family that would rather erase its own than accept imperfection. It is one part of a larger story, a story that includes not only the shame of exile, but the glory of accumulation. For the Black family's obsession with purity extended beyond blood into every aspect of their existence, and that obsession generated a material legacy that is equally revealing. The wealth of the noble house, the vaults filled with ancient gold and artifacts dark and bright, tells a story of its own, one we will turn to next. The burns on the tapestry tell one story, a story of exile and betrayal, of names erased from history for the crime of love or rebellion. But the names that remain, those golden threads still clinging to the fabric, they tell the real story of the Black family, because real power in the wizarding world does not live in a motto stitched onto a wall. However ancient, it does not live in the pure blood that runs through a vein. Real power in the wizarding world lives deep beneath London, in the catacombs of Gringotts, behind doors that only a handful of wizards have ever opened. Real power lives in Vault 711, the vault of the noble and most ancient House of Black. To investigate the sources of the Black family fortune is to trace the very roots of the wizarding economy itself. The Blacks did not simply accumulate wealth, they consolidated the very currency of the magical world. Their fortune did not begin with galleons, because galleons can be spent. Their fortune began with land. Grants from the Crown in the Middle Ages gave them vast tracts of the Scottish Highlands, stretches of territory so remote that the ministry did not even know they existed. These were lands where magical beasts roamed freely, forests rich with creatures whose pelts and horns and blood formed the backbone of the potion trade for centuries. The family owned the mineral rights to veins of copper and silver and gold that the goblins themselves coveted, and the Blacks knew exactly how to translate that hunger into debt. But land is a passive asset. It requires time to grow. The true engine of the Black fortune, the source of their endless liquidity, came from ancient artifacts. The Blacks were not merely hoarders of magical objects, they were its bankers. For centuries, they financed expeditions into the deepest ruins across Europe and took a share of every finding. An enchanted goblet from a lost civilization, a cursed armor from a forgotten war, a wand core extracted from a creature that had not been seen in 1,000 years. These objects did not sit idly on shelves at 12 Grimmauld Place. They were deployed into the wizard economy. They were lent to the ministry for study, exchanged for political favours, or held as collateral for loans to lesser noble families. The Blacks understood that magic objects held a value that transcended the finite limits of gold. They were a currency that never depreciated, a leverage that only increased with time. So what exactly lay within the depths of Vault 711? It was not merely a room stacked with galleons. It was a secured repository of the wizarding world's financial stability. Inside that vault, the coins were not the uniform currency of the modern era. They were minted with the faces of forgotten ministers and goblin kings, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of silent accumulation. But more valuable than the gold were the documents. the scrolls bearing the deeds to buildings in Diagon Alley that had always carried the Black name, the patents to revolutionary potion formulas that families like the Slughorns had perfected under direct Black patronage. The vault contained the promissory notes of half the pure blood nobility in Britain. The Black family did not merely own a fortune, they held the debts of their peers. This meant that when the Malfoys needed to rebuild after a scandal, or when the Lestranges needed to fund an expedition, they did not go to a bank, they went to the Blacks. And the Blacks always collected. This brings us to the most enduring function of the family's wealth, how financial leverage was used to influence the Ministry of Magic for centuries. The Blacks understood a profound truth about power. Laws are written by those who pay the scribes. They controlled the Wizengamot not through loud votes, but through quiet loans. When a Minister of Magic needed to fund a goblin war, whose vault did they access? A Black vault. When the Department of Magical Law Enforcement needed to expand its Auror force, whose gold filled the coffers? Black gold. This leverage was exerted so subtly that it is almost never recorded in the histories. A family that lends the ministry 1,000,000 galleons for a war effort does not ask for repayment in coin. They ask for repayment in policy, non-interference in pure blood affairs, positions on the Hogwarts Board of Governors, seats on the Wizengamot that went unfilled until the right candidate was proposed. This financial control insulated the family from the very justice they helped to shape. It was the invisible foundation upon which the entire pure blood hierarchy was built. The wealth of the Black family was not a backdrop to their story. It was the engine of their influence, the air that the family breathed. It is why disowned members were so dangerous to the establishment. They knew where the bodies were buried. Financially speaking, they knew the exact value of every promise broken, every debt called in too late. But we know that the power of the vault was ultimately a corrupting one. It could not buy loyalty, and it could not buy the future. The galleons grew cold, the artifacts grew dark, and the family itself began to fracture from the inside. This is the inheritance that fell to the final generation that truly mattered. 3 women, born into this impossible wealth, were left to decide what the ancient fortune meant. Each of them stood in the shadow of Vault 711, and each of them chose a completely different path. Up next, we will examine the lives of the Black Sisters, Bellatrix, Andromeda, and Narcissa, 3 daughters of the most ancient house. Each confronted with the same gilded cage, one embraced its darkness and became the most feared Death Eater of her age. One shattered the bars of the cage for love and was burned from the tapestry forever, and one bent the will of the family fortune to the survival of her own son, manipulating the Dark Lord himself with nothing but a mother's cunning. The 3 sisters, a story of 3 fates forged by the same fire, and how their choices ultimately unmade a dynasty that had stood for 1,000 years. And yet, for all that gold and those ancient vaults, for all the land deeds and cursed artifacts that lined the Black family coffers, the true currency of their legacy was never galleons or sickles. It was blood. And in the generation born to Cygnus Black and his wife Druella Rosier, that blood was poured into 3 daughters, each one a distinct vessel for the family's most precious and punishing ambitions. Cygnus Black knew the weight of expectation better than most. As the son of Pollux Black, he had been raised on the iron law of Toujours pur, and when he married Druella, herself a Rosier, a name that carried its own ancient pedigree, the union was never about love. It was about continuation. But Cygnus and Druella produced no son. 3 daughters arrived, one after another, and in a family that prized the male line above all else. This was a quiet catastrophe. The tapestry would show their names, of course. But the family's future, the continuation of the surname Black, now rested entirely on the shoulders of these 3 girls. They were not heirs in the traditional sense, but they were vessels for alliances, reservoirs of pure blood, to be married into other noble houses, to secure debts and favours and political dominance for generations to come. Bellatrix came first in 1951. From the moment she could speak, she carried a fire that bordered on ferocity. She was the eldest, and the family poured into her all the dogmatic certainty they could muster. She was taught that her blood made her royalty, that her magic was a birthright to be wielded without mercy, and she believed it. Every lesson in dark arts, every whispered tale of Muggle-born inferiority, every stern lecture on the sacred duty of a black daughter, it all crystallized into a personality that was at once brilliant and terrifying. Bellatrix was not merely loyal to the family's ideology. She became its most fanatical champion. She wore her pure blood like a crown, and she craved power the way others crave warmth. When she finally met Lord Voldemort, she did not just pledge allegiance. She recognized a kindred spirit, someone who would never ask her to be soft, someone who would never expect her to be a wife in the traditional sense, unless it served a greater purpose. Andromeda, the second daughter, was different. Born in 1953, she entered a household already shaped by Bellatrix's intensity. Andromeda was quieter, more observant. She watched her sisters rage, and her parents' relentless pressure, and rather than adopt their fervour, she began to question the very foundations of the world they had built. She was still a black, still raised on the same stories, the same portraits of ancestors who glared down from the walls of Grimmauld Place. But somewhere in her adolescence, a crack formed in the facade. She began to wonder whether the blood in her veins was truly more valuable than the blood of a Muggle-born. She began to doubt, and to doubt in the House of Black was to invite annihilation. Then came Narcissa, the youngest, born in 1955. Narcissa was the careful one, the strategist. She understood her family's expectations, not as a call to fanaticism like Bellatrix, nor as a source of inner conflict like Andromeda, but as a set of rules to be navigated with grace. She was beautiful, composed, and fiercely protective of her own. She learned early that survival in this family and knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, when to smile and when to strike. She watched Bellatrix embrace the darkness and Andromeda drift toward rebellion, and she chose a middle path: outward compliance, inner calculation. Narcissa would marry well. She would bear a son, and she would ensure her children never faced the disgrace that threatened to consume her sisters. She was the family's hope for a pristine legacy, the daughter who could carry the black name into the next generation without scandal. The expectations placed on these three sisters were crushing. They were not allowed to choose their own futures. Their futures were predetermined by their blood. They were to marry into other sacred 28 families, to produce pureblood heirs, to strengthen the web of alliances that had sustained the Black family for centuries. Bellatrix was betrothed to Rodolphus Lestrange, a man as steeped in dark magic as she was, and she embraced the match because it gave her proximity to power. Andromeda was expected to follow a similar path, to accept a husband chosen for her by her parents, to become another brick in the wall of pure blood supremacy. But Andromeda had other plans. She met a Muggle-born wizard named Ted Tonks, and in that meeting, she found something the Black family had never taught her: love that was not transactional, love that did not require her to be pure. The moment Andromeda chose Ted, she understood what it would cost. She was a Black. She had been taught that her blood was sacred, that to dilute it with Muggle-born blood was a pollution of the family line, and yet she did it anyway. And when the news reached Cygnus and Druella, when the tapestry in the drawing room of Grimmauld Place was taken out and the ritual of burning began, Andromeda's name was scorched from the family tree as surely as if a fire had consumed her flesh. She became the first of the three sisters to be erased, the first to break away from the iron grip of Toujours. But her story, her betrayal, would set in motion a chain of events that would echo through the wars to come. And it is that story, the story of the first burned name, that we will turn to next. In the tapestry of number 12, Grimmauld Place, the three names of Cygnus and Druella's daughters once sat in a perfect gilded row: Bellatrix, Andromeda, Narcissa, They were the final jewels of the main branch, bound by blood, and the weight of 1,000 years of expectation. But expectations have a way of cracking under pressure, and the cracks always start where the family refuses to look. The scandal of Andromeda's romance with the Muggle-born Ted Tonks did not erupt suddenly. It grew in the quiet spaces of Hogwarts, in libraries and courtyards, where no one thought to watch a black daughter too closely. Ted Tonks was a Hufflepuff, possessed of a gentle dignity and a sharp mind. He was everything the family despised, and he was everything Andromeda needed. She was the middle sister, the one who watched rather than commanded, and what she saw in her family was a slow suffocation. In Ted, she saw a world that did not require her to be cruel. Their romance was a rebellion not of fire, but of quiet conviction. Letters were exchanged under cover of darkness, meetings arranged through trusted friends, and for a time, it remained a secret tucked away from the brutal light of the family. But secrets in the House of Black have a half-life. When the truth surfaced, it did not arrive as a rumor. It arrived as a confrontation. The immediate and violent reaction of the family to her blood treason was absolute. There was no trial, no counsel. Cygnus Black did not mourn his daughter. He erased her. Andromeda was summoned to the drawing room at Grimmauld Place. And there, before the tapestry, she was informed that she no longer existed to them. The ritual was swift. A curse was cast upon the golden thread of her name. It smoked, turning black, blistering, and then burning away completely, leaving a hole in the fabric where a daughter once stood. The smell of scorched cloth and ink filled the room. Druella did not weep. Bellatrix watched with a cold, approving fury. Narcissa watched in silence, and she never forgot the sound of that name burning. The removal from the tapestry was meant to be a severing, but it served a far darker purpose. How her removal from the tapestry served as a warning to her sisters was immediate and intentional. Narcissa looked at that smouldering scar in the family line, and she understood with perfect clarity that her freedom was conditional. She could survive as long as she played the game. She could marry Lucius Malfoy. She could navigate the treacherous waters of pure blood politics. But the price of stepping out of line was annihilation. For Bellatrix, the warning was not a caution, it was a confirmation. The family was finally purging its weakness. She saw Andromeda not as a lost sister, but as a traitor who had proven the family right. The weak had to be culled, and Bellatrix would spend the rest of her life ensuring that no one else in her orbit had the chance to run. But here is the irony that the tapestry cannot record. Andromeda Tonks walked out of Grimmauld Place that night, and she never looked back. She married Ted. She built a home filled with warmth and laughter, two things the noble and most ancient House of Black had always starved its children of. She gave birth to Nymphadora Tonks, a metamorphmagus whose very existence defied the rigid structures of blood purity. The Black family line continued, not through their carefully curated marriages, but through the daughter they burned away. Andromeda became the grandmother of Teddy Lupin. The blood carried on in the most human way possible, through love, not duty. But if the burning of Andromeda's name was a sentence for the middle sister, for the eldest, it was a branding. It hardened Bellatrix. It showed her that the world was divided absolutely into the pure and the impure, and that mercy had no place in that division. We have watched the quiet rebellion of Andromeda. We have seen the calculated silence of Narcissa. Now we must look into the heart of the storm that was brewing in the eldest daughter. What happens when a young woman raised on absolute purity meets a leader who promises her the power to enforce that purity absolutely? The ashes of Andromeda's name had barely settled when Bellatrix Black began her descent into something far darker than family loyalty. Up next is Chapter 9, Bellatrix, the radicalization of a pure blood. The burning of Andromeda's name from the Black family tapestry was not just a punishment. It was a declaration. It told every future generation that love for a Muggle-born was the highest form of treason, and that the only acceptable response was total erasure. For the remaining sisters, Bellatrix and Narcissa. The lesson was seared into the fabric of their home. One would learn it too well, internalizing it until her very soul became a weapon for the darkest wizard of the age. The other would learn to wear the lesson like a mask, hiding a heart that beat for something entirely different. Bellatrix Black entered Hogwarts in 1962, a year before her sister Narcissa. She was 11 years old, already steeped in the rhetoric of pure-blood supremacy, already viewing the world through a lens that divided it into the worthy and the unworthy. But Hogwarts did not temper her prejudices. It gave them a laboratory. For Bellatrix, the castle was not a place of learning in the traditional sense. It was a proving ground, a gallery of dark wonders waiting to be unlocked. She was sorted into Slytherin, of course. And there she found her tribe, not just the pure-blood sons and daughters of other ancient families, but the ones who whispered about forbidden spells in empty classrooms, who exchanged notes on curses their parents had used in the First War. What set Bellatrix apart was not her intelligence. Though she was sharp, it was her hunger. She devoured every text on the dark arts she could find in the restricted section, often slipping past the librarian's gaze with the arrogance of someone who believed the rules were written for lesser beings. She was drawn to the theory of pain, not just the infliction of it, but the philosophy behind it. She believed that power was the only truth, and that the dark arts were simply the most honest expression of that truth. Her professors noticed a coldness in her, a willingness to push boundaries that went beyond typical teenage rebellion. She hexed a classmate who had accidentally bumped into her in the corridor, not with the simple jinx, but with something that left the student bedridden for a week. She never faced serious punishment. The black name carried weight, and Bellatrix wielded it like a blade. Her obsession with the dark arts only deepened as she progressed through school. She began to study the theory of Horcruxes, though she never attempted to create one herself. Not then. She pored over accounts of the most dangerous wizards in history, taking notes on their methods, their failures, their triumphs. To her, the dark arts were not a corrupting force. They were a refining fire. She saw herself as one of the few who could walk through that fire and emerge stronger, unmelted. By the time she sat her news, Bellatrix Black was already a practitioner of magic that most adult wizards would never dare touch. She had forged her identity not just as a pure blood, but as a devotee of the most extreme form of magical power. And then she graduated, and the world outside Hogwarts offered her a new arena. The early 1970s were a time of growing tension in the wizarding world. Lord Voldemort was gathering followers, whispering promises of a new order where pure bloods would rule. For Bellatrix, his ideology was not a revelation. It was a confirmation of everything she had always believed. She sought him out, not as a recruiter might seek a volunteer, but as a supplicant seeks a god. And Voldemort, who knew the value of the Black family's name and resources, welcomed her. But before she could fully commit herself to his cause, there was the matter of her future. The Black family did not believe in love matches, not for daughters of such high standing. Bellatrix was to be married to Rodolphus Lestrange, a man from another ancient and wealthy pure-blood lineage. The Lestranges were known for their own dark tendencies, their own fanatical devotion to blood purity. The union was a strategic alliance designed to bind two powerful families together to consolidate wealth and influence. Bellatrix did not object. She had never been taught that marriage was about affection or partnership. It was a transaction, a duty. Rodolphus was handsome enough, and he shared her beliefs. More importantly, he was willing to let her pursue her true passion, the service of the Dark Lord. Their wedding was a grand affair, held at the Lestrange estate, attended by the most prominent pure-blood families. Narcissa was there, of course, standing as a bridesmaid, her own future already being arranged with a certain Lucius Malfoy. Andromeda was not. She had been burnt from the Tapestry the year before, and her absence was a silent wound that no one acknowledged. Bellatrix wore black, not white, and the ceremony was devoid of any tenderness. When she kissed Rodolphus, it was a formality, a seal on a contract. Her true allegiance lay elsewhere. That allegiance was tested almost immediately. Voldemort's first rise to power was brutal and swift. Bellatrix, alongside her husband and his brother Rabastan, became Death Eaters in the truest sense. They were not just followers, they were executioners. Bellatrix volunteered for the most violent missions, the ones that required not just magical skill, but a complete lack of remorse. She tortured Muggleborns for sport. She participated in the murder of entire families. She revelled in the fear she could inspire. Voldemort saw in her a perfect instrument, someone who did not need to be convinced of the righteousness of their cause, someone who would never question an order, someone whose loyalty was absolute because it was based on worship, not reason. This was the psychological shift that transformed Bellatrix Black into Bellatrix Lestrange, the most devoted lieutenant the Dark Lord ever had. It was not a single moment of conversion. It was a gradual erosion of any remaining humanity, a deliberate cultivation of cruelty. She began to see herself as Voldemort's right hand, his most trusted warrior. She believed that he saw her as more than a servant, that he valued her above all others. In truth, Voldemort valued only power, and Bellatrix was useful because she was powerful and predictable. But to her, the bond was sacred. She would have died for him, without hesitation. She would have killed her own sisters for him, and later she would try. After the Dark Lord's first fall, after the night he tried to kill Harry Potter and vanished, Bellatrix was among those who refused to believe he was gone. She and the Lestranges continued to fight, to torture, to search for any sign of his return. Their capture came after they used the Cruciatus Casseur on Frank and Alice Longbottom, seeking information that did not exist. Bellatrix showed no remorse during the trial. She laughed. She declared that the Dark Lord would rise again. She was sentenced to life in Azkaban, and the years that followed did not break her devotion. They only sharpened it, turning her into a figure of pure distilled fanaticism, a woman whose only purpose was to await her master's return. And when he did return, she was waiting. She was the one who broke him out of his weakness, who nursed him back to power, who stood beside him in the graveyard during the ritual that restored his body. Her love for him was not romantic. It was something far more dangerous. It was the love of a worshipper for a deity, a blind, total, consuming faith. She would never see him as flawed, never question his methods, never hesitate. That was her fate, her choice, her identity. But not every Black sister followed that path. As Bellatrix descended into the darkness, her youngest sister was preparing for a very different future. Narcissa Malfoy would soon make a marriage that seemed equally strategic. But she carried a secret weapon that her sister never possessed, a mother's love for her son. And that love would put her on a collision course with Bellatrix, with Voldemort, and with the very foundations of the pure blood world they both claim to uphold. The story of Narcissa is one of quiet manipulation, of a woman who learned to play the game so well that she survived the fall of the Dark Lord himself, bending the rules of allegiance to protect the one thing Bellatrix could never understand: family not as a symbol, but as a living, breathing bond. If Bellatrix Lestrange was the fury of the House of Black made flesh, a living curse hurled at the world, then her younger sister Narcissa was its carefully concealed knife, sharp, polished and hidden beneath the folds of silk robes until the precise moment it was needed. Where Bellatrix was a wildfire, burning everything in sight, Narcissa was ice, formed under immense pressure, capable of cutting deeper than any flame. In a family that bred fanatics and exiles in equal measure, Narcissa Black carved out a different kind of legacy. She understood that true power did not come from screaming the Dark Lord's name in the middle of a battle. It came from the whispered conversation in the drawing room, the marriage contract signed in the quiet of the manor, and the unyielding protection of a family name long after the war was lost. From the moment she was born, the third daughter of Cygnus and Druella Black, Narcissa was sculpted for a specific purpose. She was the one who never stumbled, the one who never asked questions, the one who embodied the family motto, Toujours, not as a battle cry, but as a sacred duty. While Andromeda was the quiet rebel, prone to romantic idealism, and Bellatrix was the ambitious firebrand, consumed by the power of the dark arts, Narcissa was the anchor. She was trained to be the curator of the Black family's social standing. She learned the intricate language of wizarding high society, the way a diplomat learns the protocols of a foreign court. Every curtsy, every greeting, every carefully neutral expression was a tool. She upheld every tradition not out of blind faith, but because she understood that tradition was the bedrock of their power. To break from it, as Andromeda did, was not just a moral failing in her eyes. It was a strategic catastrophe, a crack in the foundation that threatened the entire house. This brings us to the single most important event in Narcissa's early life, her engagement to Lucius Malfoy. This was not a love story in the conventional sense, at least not at first. It was a merger, a fusion of two of the most formidable fortunes in the wizarding world. The Black family brought ancient lineage, a claim to nobility that stretched back to the Middle Ages, and a vault at Gringotts stuffed with the spoils of centuries. The Malfoys brought political influence, a connection to the ministry that the Blacks, in their insular grandeur, sometimes lacked, and a reputation for getting what they wanted without ever getting their hands dirty. The union of the Black and Malfoy fortunes reshaped the political landscape of the wizarding elite. It created a block of wealth and influence that rivaled the ministry itself. They were the undisputed royalty of Nocturne Alley, but their presence was felt in the highest corridors of power. When Narcissa Black became Narcissa Malfoy, she did not simply trade one name for another. She completed a circuit of power that would light the way for the pure blood agenda for decades to come. Their courtship was a masterclass in pure blood diplomacy. Gifts were exchanged not for sentiment, but as political gestures. Dinners were arranged not for romance, but to publicly cement the alliance of the two houses. The engagement was announced in the society pages of the Daily Prophet, not as a love match, but as a fait accompli. The wizarding aristocracy understood exactly what it meant. The Black family had just consolidated a level of power that had not been seen since the founding of the ministry itself. When Narcissa walked down the aisle in her ancestral home, she was not simply marrying a man, she was seizing control of the future. The marriage contract, written in silver ink on parchment thick as dragonhide, was signed with the blood of both houses. The ceremony itself was a gathering of the Sacred 28, a reunion of the old guard, and in that room, adorned with finest silk and darkest emeralds, Narcissa Black achieved exactly what she was born to do. She became the linchpin, connecting the Black ambition to the Malfoy influence. This is where we must draw the sharp distinction between Narcissa and Bellatrix. Both were raised in the same house, by the same parents, under the same oppressive tapestry, but they arrived at the ideology via completely different roads. Bellatrix believed in the violence. She believed in the terror. She worshipped the Dark Lord because he could unleash the chaos she craved. For Narcissa, the Dark Lord was a tool, a very powerful, very dangerous tool, but a tool nonetheless. Her loyalty was never to the cause of blood purity as a religious doctrine. Her loyalty was to her family. The subtle differences between her cold pragmatism and Bellatrix's chaotic fervour are the key to understanding everything Narcissa did. Bellatrix would burn down the wizarding world just to watch it glow. Narcissa would burn down a single building if it meant securing a safe room for her son. Where Bellatrix was a soldier, Narcissa was a general, and a general knows that sometimes the war must be waged in whispers. This pragmatism defined her every action during the First and Second Wars. She hosted the dinners, she draped her home in the Dark Lord's regalia, she kept her husband aligned with the cause, but her eyes were always on the prize, the survival of her son, Draco. She ruled her home with a cool, precise hand. The house elves moved like ghosts. The china was never chipped. and the reputation of the family was never sullied. Chaos to Narcissa was the enemy. Uncontrolled passion, recklessness, public scandal, these were the tools of lesser houses. The Malfoys and the Blacks before them were above that. When the war came to her doorstep, when the Dark Lord took residence in her home, she adapted. She became the perfect hostess, even to a guest who could kill her with a word. But beneath that perfect facade, a second, more urgent calculation was running. When she realized that the war was becoming a suicide pact for her family, the mask of the perfect Death Eater wife began to crack. The moment in the Forbidden Forest, when she lied directly to Lord Voldemort's face, telling him that Harry Potter was dead, was not a sudden change of heart. It was the culmination of years of cold calculation. She had finally found a scenario where her family's survival outweighed the Dark Lord's trust. Bellatrix would have died for the Dark Lord without a second thought. Narcissa Malfoy was perfectly willing to let the Dark Lord die for her son. That is the razor's edge between them. In the end, Narcissa achieved what very few Blacks ever managed. She survived the collapse of the old world and smuggled her line into the new one intact. With Draco and his future secured, she played the game exactly the way she was taught, and she won. But the House of Black was not built entirely of such calculating strategists. It was also a house of intense, defiant passion. And while Narcissa was securing her legacy from within the fortress of social convention, another branch of the family was preparing to light a match. A generation born under the same tapestry, breathing the same toxic air, who would choose to burn their own name off the tree, rather than let that suffocating purity define them. The most famous rebel the family ever produced was just a few short years from entering Hogwarts, and his childhood rebellion would shake the House of Black to its foundations. The union of Narcissa Black and Lucius Malfoy was a masterclass in pure blood strategy. It was a merger of fortunes, of influence, and of rigid ideology. Narcissa played the role assigned to her at birth, flawlessly, becoming the matriarch of a powerful dynasty. But while she was carefully constructing her gilded cage at Malfoy Manor, a very different kind of war was erupting in her childhood home. At number 12, Grimmauld Place, the foundations of the noble and most ancient House of Black were being shaken from within. The family had produced traitors before. Andromeda had been burned off the tapestry for marrying the Muggle-born Ted Tonks, but she was a daughter. Her value was in her marriage. The true threat to the bloodline was in the male line, and the male line had produced Sirius Black. Sirius was born in 1960, the eldest son, the heir to a legacy of madness and prejudice. From the moment he could form his own thoughts, he looked at the family tapestry and felt only revulsion. The motto Toujours was not a sacred charge to him, it was a curse. He did not see his family as wizard royalty. He saw his mother, Walburga, as a screaming tyrant clutching a black walrus of an umbrella. He saw his father, Orion, as a quiet coward who allowed the tyranny to flourish. And he decided, very early on, that he wanted no part of it. This was his early rejection of the ideology. And it was not a simple disagreement. It was a deep, visceral loathing. To understand the depth of his rebellion, you have to understand the pressure cooker of Grimmauld Place. It was not a home. It was a fortress of dogma. Every portrait on the wall was a judge. The very wallpaper seemed to vibrate with dark magic and bitter resentment. Walburga ruled with a voice that could shatter glass, screaming about blood traitors and the decay of wizarding society. Every meal was a tribunal. Every quiet moment was a trap waiting to spring. Into this environment, Sirius brought the loud, messy, defiant energy of a boy who refused to bow. The domestic tension was a physical presence in that house. It coiled around the banisters, seeped under the doors, and clotted in the air itself. And then there was the room, Sirius's bedroom. It was not just a place to sleep, it was a declaration of war. While the rest of Grimmauld Place was a shrine to the ancient and the pure, covered in dark artifacts and the regalia of pure blood supremacy, Sirius turned his personal space into a shrine to everything his parents hated. He plastered the walls, and not with magical posters of the Falmouth Falcons or the Wimborne Wasps. He covered every inch of that grim, darkened wallpaper with images of muggles, muggle motorbikes, muggle girls in bikinis, posters of muggle rock bands and American pin-up models. It was a savage, deliberate and deeply personal insult. It was the physical manifestation of his defiance. Every poster was a middle finger to the tapestry that stretched downstairs. It was a visual scream that he would rather embrace the world his parents hated than be suffocated by their world of shadows and dust. The inevitable conflict came in waves. Screaming matches echoed through the halls. His mother tried to strip the room bare, but the posters always went back up. The war raged on. This rebellion had a profound effect on the boy in the room down the hall. Regulus Black watched his brother become a human bonfire. He heard the curses and witnessed the screaming matches that could curdle blood. While Sirius fought the system open, charging into Gryffindor and friendship, and a fate far different than the one laid out for him, Regulus took the opposite path. He sought safety in compliance. He became the Golden Son by default, the heir who would do exactly as he was told, who would take the dark mark to make his mother proud, who would believe the rhetoric, because believing it was safer than being burned alive for denying it. But the seeds of rebellion have many ways of growing. For Sirius, they bloomed into a loud and open war. For Regulus, they festered in the dark, silent and patient, waiting for the moment when the weight of his choices would finally crush him. It is that tragic and complicated path toward a terrible heroism that we will explore in the very next chapter, a chapter we call The Golden Boy. Regulus's path to glory. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. And so, while Sirius Black burned his bridges with every defiant word, every Gryffindor tie, every friendship with a Muggle born, the house at number 12 Grimmauld Place turned its gaze to the other son, the younger one, the one who had not yet raised his voice or his wand against the family, Regulus Arcturus Black. Born in 1961, just 1 year after his brother, he was the spare heir, the quiet shadow, the child who did not need to scream for attention because he already had it. In the aftermath of Sirius's rebellion, the weight of the Black legacy did not break. It transferred. From the moment Sirius slammed the front door and never looked back, Regulus became something more than a second son. He became the Golden Boy, the favoured son, and he embraced the family's dark legacy, not because he was forced to, but because it was the only path he knew, the only path that promised love, approval, purpose. To understand Regulus Black is to understand the immense pressure placed on him to restore the family honour after Sirius's rebellion, a burden that would shape him, manipulate him, and ultimately destroy him. Consider the atmosphere in the cavernous drawing room of Grimmauld Place after Sirius left. The portraits of ancestors howled their fury, their painted eyes following Regulus as he walked past the tapestry, a small charred hole now marked where Sirius's name had been. For the first time, Regulus saw his own name clearly, untouched, bright gold thread against the dark fabric. He was now the only son, the only heir, and his mother, while Burger, made sure he understood that every day. She would sit him down at the long mahogany table, the silver locket of Salazar Slytherin hanging around her neck, and she would tell him the stories of the family's glory. She would speak of the Sacred 28, of the pure blood alliances, of the duty to keep the bloodline pure, and then she would mention Sirius, his name never spoken aloud, only gestured toward the burnt tapestry with a flick of her wand. "You will not fail us," she would say. "You will not bring shame upon this house. You will be the one who restores what your brother destroyed." Regulus listened. He absorbed, and he began to believe that his destiny was not his own, but a debt to be paid. His early fascination with the Dark Lord as a means of fulfilling his destiny did not spring from hatred alone. It came from a need for certainty. Lord Voldemort offered order. He offered a world where blood status was the only law, where the Black family's ancient pride could finally be seen as virtue rather than prejudice. Regulus was at Hogwarts when the first whispers of the Dark Lord's power reached the common rooms of Slytherin. He heard the older students speak of him with reverence, as if he were a force of nature, and in the shadow of his brother's desertion, Regulus found himself drawn to that certainty. He wanted to be part of something that would never abandon him. He joined the Death Eaters. He took the Dark Mark, and he did so with the solemn pride of a son, fulfilling a prophecy his mother had written for him. In the halls of Hogwarts, he walked with a new confidence. Where Sirius had sneered at the family's values, Regulus wore them like a cloak. He became a prefect, a star Quidditch player, a young man who seemed destined for greatness within Voldemort's inner circle. The family tapestry glowed a little brighter with his name. Wahlburger would gaze at it for hours, murmuring to the portrait of her husband Orion that at last one of their sons had understood. But the darkness that Regulus embraced was not simple. It was seductive. It whispered to him that he was special, chosen, that his sacrifices would mean something, and so he gave himself to the cause. He delivered information, he performed tasks, he knelt at the feet of the Dark Lord and felt the weight of approval settle on his shoulders like a mantle. Yet even as he climbed, there was a crack in the foundation. It came in the form of a house elf named Kreacher, the same Kreacher who had served the Black family for generations, who had been dismissed and belittled by Sirius, but who Regulus had always treated with a quiet, distant respect, not out of kindness, but out of duty. The elf was a tool, but then Voldemort asked for a tool. He needed a house elf to test a magical defense in a cave far from the world. Regulus offered Kreacher without hesitation. It was an act of loyalty, he told himself. But when Kreacher returned, broken and terrified, describing a basin of poison and a locket that the Dark Lord had hidden, something shifted in Regulus's chest. He did not confront Voldemort. He did not betray his lord in a dramatic display. Instead, he began to read. He studied the Dark Lord's methods. He learned of Horcruxes, of the splitting of the soul, of the cruelty that Voldemort did not see as cruelty, but as necessity. And for the first time, Regulus saw the truth. The family's dark legacy was not a path to glory, it was a chain. Voldemort was not the saviour of pure bloods. He was a monster using them as fuel, and Regulus had been chosen to serve that monster because he was the golden boy, the one who would never say no. But he did say no. In the end, he chose the one act that would undo everything he had worked for. He returned to the cave with Kreacher. He forced the elf to swap the locket for a fake. He drank the poison, burning his insides, staggering toward the basin, and when the Inferi dragged him underwater, he did not cry out for his mother. He did not cry out for the Dark Lord. He left a note, a confession, a final act of rebellion that would not be discovered for years. Regulus Black died in that cave, not as the favoured son, but as a traitor to the very family he had tried to save. And in his death, he accomplished what Sirius could never do in life. He broke the cycle. The golden boy had fallen. But his fall did not end the Black family story. No, it only deepened the mystery. Because while Regulus had sought to destroy one Horcrux, he had no idea that another remained hidden in the very house he grew up in. And that secret would soon lead to the next scandal. A scandal involving a sorting hat, a Gryffindor in the House of Black, and a truth that would rattle the foundations of everything the family believed. Chapter 13. Sorting Hat Scandal. A Gryffindor in the House of Black, Regulus Black, had been groomed from the moment he could hold a wand to be the perfect son. His parents, especially Wahlburger, poured all their hopes into him after watching his older brother slip further and further from their grasp. Regulus was compliant, eager to please, and he repeated the family creed with the sort of fervour that made a mother's heart swell. He was the golden boy, the heir who would restore the Black name to its proper glory. But the family had not yet weathered the storm that would define them for generations. That storm landed on the 1st of September, 1971. When Sirius Black walked into the Great Hall of Hogwarts, looked up at the Sorting Hat, and shattered everything his mother believed. The Sorting Hat was supposed to be infallible. Every pure-blood family knew their house. The Blacks had always gone to Slytherin. The Slytherin was the house of ambition, of cunning, of ancient blood. It was the house that had produced the darkest wizards and the most powerful politicians. It was the house of Salazar Slytherin himself, and the Blacks traced their lineage back to the very roots of magical Britain. It was unthinkable that a Black would go anywhere else. And yet, when the hat touched Sirius's head, a silence fell over the hall. The hat hesitated. A long, uncomfortable pause that made Walburga, watching from the staff table where she had volunteered to chaperone, gripped the edge of her seat. Then the hat bellowed, "Gryffindor." The shockwave that rippled through the family was not a simple ripple. It was an earthquake. Walburga went pale, her lips pressed into a thin line of pure fury. Orion, her husband, sat stone-faced, but his hands trembled. Across the Slytherin table, Bellatrix let out a hiss of disbelief, and Narcissa brought a hand to her mouth. Andromeda, who would later be burned from the Tapestry herself, felt a strange mix of pride and dread. For Walburga, this was not a mere sorting. This was a betrayal of the blood itself. Sirius had not simply chosen a house. He had chosen to stand against his family, against the legacy of Toujours, against everything she had raised him to be. The Sorting Hat had given her the first undeniable proof that her son was lost. From that moment, the relationship between Sirius and his mother fundamentally broke. The fracture was not a slow crack that worsened over years. It was a clean, violent snap. Walburga began to treat him as a stranger in her own home. She would not speak to him directly if she could help it. Meals at Grimmauld Place became exercises in silence, broken only by the clatter of cutlery and the occasional muttered insult from her. She stopped touching him, stopped looking at him with anything other than cold contempt. When Sirius came home for the winter holidays, she refused to take his cloak, refused to acknowledge his presence until Orion forced a greeting. And when Regulus mentioned that he had heard some Gryffindors were friendly with Muggle-borns, Walburga turned to Sirius and said, "I hope you are not associating with such filth." It was not a question. It was an accusation. Sirius did not back down. He met her gaze and said, "They're better company than anyone in this house." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Walburga rose from her chair, a wand hand twitching, and for a moment it seemed she might curse him. Instead, she swept out of the room, and the portrait of her mother screamed after her. Blood traitor, blood traitor. That night, Sirius heard her sobbing in her study. But it was not the sobbing of a mother grieving for a lost child. It was the sobbing of a woman who had lost her property. He was no longer her son. He was a stain on the family name, and she would spend the rest of her life trying to scrub him away. The contrast with Regulus's sorting, a year later, could not have been more stark. When Regulus stepped up to the stool, the hall was tense. Everyone knew what had happened to his brother. The whispers followed him everywhere. Will he be another Gryffindor? Is the Black family cursed? But the Sorting Hat barely touched his head before it shouted. Suffering. The Slytherin table erupted in applause. Bellatrix stood up and clapped, her eyes gleaming. Narcissa smiled warmly. Even Walburga, who had not smiled in months, allowed a single tear to roll down her cheek. She reached out and squeezed Regulus's hand as he sat down beside her, and she whispered, "You have made us proud. You are a true Black." In that moment, the divide between the brothers became absolute. Sirius was the shame, the failure, the one who had rejected the family. Regulus was the redemption, the proof that the Black blood could still produce a worthy heir. But the tragedy lay in the details that no one saw. Regulus's smile as he sat down was not one of triumph. It was a smile of relief, of release from an unbearable weight. He had been terrified that he would follow his brother's path, terrified that he too would disappoint his mother. He had spent the entire summer practicing how to hold his wand, how to speak, how to act like a proper Black. He had memorized the family motto and recited it to himself before falling asleep, and when the hat chose Slytherin, he felt not pride but a shudder of dread, because he knew now that he would have to live up to that name. Every single dark expectation that came with it, while Walburga, meanwhile, doubled down on her campaign against Sirius. She wrote to the Hogwarts governors, demanding that he be placed in a different house. She sent howlers every week, screaming at him to repent, to change his ways. She burned his belongings when he was not home, erasing every trace of his childhood from Grimmauld Place. She even attempted to remove his name from the family tree Tapestry. But the magic of the tapestry resisted. The name would not burn until the person was truly dead, or permanently cast out. So she settled for covering his portrait with a black cloth, as if he were already gone. But the most telling sign of the broken relationship came during Sirius's second year, when he returned home for the summer holidays. He walked through the front door of Grimmauld Place, and the house itself seemed to reject him. The chandelier flickered. The portraits of his ancestors turned their backs. Kreacher the house elf glared at him from the shadows, and Walburga, sitting in her high-backed chair in the drawing room, did not even look up. She simply said, "You are no longer welcome here. You may sleep in the attic. Do not speak to your brother. Do not touch anything, and do not expect to be fed." Sirius stood in the doorway, his trunk heavy in his hand, and he realized that the home he had grown up in was now a prison he had escaped. He turned around, walked back out into the rain, and did not return until the night he ran away for good. The Sorting Hat had not just placed him in Gryffindor, it had drawn a line in the sand, a line that Walburga would never cross, and that Sirius would never retreat from. And in that line, the House of Black began its slow, quiet collapse. One brother lost to the light, the other lost to the dark, and a mother whose love had curdled into a weapon she would use until the day she died. What happened next would shape the rest of Sirius's life. He found a new family at Hogwarts, a pack of misfits who would become the Marauders, and whose influence would pull him deeper into a war against the very traditions his mother held sacred. The clash between the Marauders and the tradition of the Blacks was not just a schoolyard rivalry. It was the opening battle in a war that would eventually claim the lives of both brothers. But that story, the story of how a group of 4 teenagers changed the course of magical history, will have to wait for another chapter. The Sorting Hat scandal did not fade into distant memory. It lingered. It festered like an open wound in the walls of Grimmauld Place. Every summer, Sirius returned to a house that was no longer a home, but a battlefield frozen in time. Walburga Black could not forgive. She could only punish. And her punishment was the cold, silent withdrawal of every ounce of maternal warmth she had ever pretended to possess. She would look at him, her son, and see a stranger, a stain on the bloodline, a mistake that could not be rectified, only endured. But Hogwarts was not merely a school for Sirius Black. It was oxygen. It was the first place he ever truly felt the warmth of belonging. And that belonging came in the form of 3 boys who saw him as something other than a Black. James Potter looked at him and saw a brother. Remus Lupin looked at him and saw a friend who carried his own kind of invisible burden. And Peter Pettigrew looked at him with a desperate eagerness to belong that Sirius recognized in his own reflection. They were the Marauders, but more than that, they were his sanctuary. James understood the weight of carrying a legacy you did not ask for. Remus knew the loneliness of a secret that could destroy you. Together, they taught Sirius that family was not a matter of blood, it was a matter of choice. The Potters, Fleamont and Euphemia heard the whispers. They saw the bruises that Sirius tried to hide beneath his sleeves. They never forced the story from him. They simply left the door open. And when the summer of his 16th year arrived, and the violence at Grimmauld Place escalated beyond anything he could bear, Sirius made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He ran. He walked out of number 12, Grimmauld Place, and did not look back. The heavy front door clicked shut behind him. sealing him off from a lineage of darkness, a legacy of purity, and a mother whose love had always been conditional. He went straight to Godric's Hollow. Euphemia Potter opened the door. She saw the look in his eyes, the trembling of his hands, and she did not ask a single question. She simply wrapped her arms around him and pulled him inside. The Potters gave him a room. They gave him a seat at their table. They gave him the unconditional warmth that Walburga had never been capable of offering. For the first time in his life, Sirius Black had a mother who kissed him goodnight. But the House of Black could not allow such a defection to go unpunished. Walburga stood before the sprawling family tapestry in the drawing room, the golden threads of their lineage stretching across the wall like a map of obligation. She raised her wand not to mend but to destroy. The burst of fire was silent, but the message was absolute. The thread bearing the name Sirius Black ignited, shriveled and turned to ash. Where his place had once been stitched into the fabric of wizarding history, there was now only a blackened, permanent scorch mark, a wound that would never heal, a void of defiance. He was to be forgotten. He was to be a stranger to the blood, an enemy of the family name. And yet, as Sirius sat in the sunny kitchen of the Potter house, he felt a lightness he had never known. The disinheritance was not a punishment. It was a release. The name Black was no longer a chain around his neck. He was simply Sirius, a Gryffindor, a marauder, a son of a house that loved him without condition. But the shadows of his bloodline were longer than he realized. The war was approaching, and while Sirius had found his light in the warmth of the Potters, his brother Regulus was walking deeper into the cold, seeking validation from a master who demanded everything. The House of Black was about to be divided not merely by a tapestry of burned names, but by war itself. Up next is Chapter 15, The Rise of the Dark Lord, a family divided. The summer Sirius Black ran away from home. The walls of Grimmauld Place seemed to exhale a breath they had been holding for years. Walburga's screams echoed through the house for days, but the real silence came when she finally stopped. A cold, calculated quiet that settled over the house like a shroud. The tapestry, that great woven monument to the family's pride, now bore a new scar, the burn mark where Sirius had been erased. His name, his face, his very existence, scorched away as if he had never been. And yet, even as the family condemned him, a new force was rising in the shadows of the wizarding world. A force that would soon prove far more seductive to the Blacks than any rebellious son. By the late 1970s, the name Tom Riddle was known only to a few, but his moniker, Lord Voldemort, was whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence. To the noble and most ancient House of Black, he appeared not as a monster but as a saviour. For generations, the Blacks had watched their pure blood status erode. Muggles crawling into their world, Muggle-borns claiming magical heritage, blood traitors marrying beneath them. The Ministry of Magic seemed to cater to the lowest common denominator. And then came Voldemort, a wizard who promised to restore order, to purify the magical race, to return families like the Blacks to their rightful throne. To them, he was the champion they had been waiting for. The initial support was not merely political, it was ideological. The Blacks saw in Voldemort the embodiment of their own motto, Toujours, writ large across the entire wizarding world. Here was a leader who would not tolerate half-breeds or Muggle lovers. Here was a man who understood that blood was destiny. And so, when the first whispers of his movement reached Grimmauld Place, they were met not with alarm but with quiet approval. The family's extensive library, filled with tomes on dark magic and blood purity, became a resource for the young Death Eaters. Secret meetings were held within those very walls, beneath the gaze of ancestors whose portraits nodded in silent agreement. The drawing room, once the site of Sirius's defiance, now hosted hushed councils where plans were laid and oaths were sworn. Imagine the scene, the long mahogany table, polished to a dark gleam surrounded by figures in hooded robes. The fire in the grate casts flickering shadows across the walls, where the family tapestry looms like a judge. Walburga Black herself, though never a Death Eater, would sometimes sit in the corner, sipping tea, her eyes gleaming with approval as her son Regulus listened intently to the teachings of the Dark Lord. It was in this very house that Regulus Black, the golden boy, the heir who had never wavered, took the first steps toward his initiation. And it was here too that the first cracks in the family's unity began to show. The First Wizarding War did not simply divide the wizarding world into two camps. It tore the Black family apart, splitting it down the middle with the force of a blade forged from its own obsession with purity. On one side stood Bellatrix Lestrange, the eldest of the Black sisters, who had married Rodolphus Lestrange to keep the bloodline strong. She was not merely a supporter of Voldemort. She was his most devoted follower, a woman who craved his approval with a fervour that bordered on madness. Her husband and his brother followed suit, and together they became known as some of the most feared Death Eaters in the ranks. Bellatrix's loyalty was absolute, her cruelty legendary. She would have burned the world for her master. On the other side, but still within the family's orbit, stood Andromeda Black, the sister who chose love over blood. When she married Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born, the Tapestry did not just burn her name, it incinerated it. She was cast out, erased, as if she had never been a Black at all. But Andromeda's defection was quiet, almost peaceful. She did not fight her family, she simply left. And in doing so, she became the living embodiment of everything the Blacks feared. A pure blood who willingly diluted her own lineage for the sake of love. And then there was Narcissa, caught between the two extremes. She married Lucius Malfoy, a man of wealth and influence, and aligned herself with the Death Eaters, not out of fanaticism, but out of pragmatism. She wanted power, security, and above all protection for her son Draco. Narcissa would later prove that her loyalty was to her family first, not the Dark Lord. But during the war, she stood by her husband, attended the secret meetings, and kept her true feelings hidden beneath a mask of aristocratic composure. The men of the family were no less divided. The patriarch, Arcturus Black, maintained an official neutrality, but his sympathies were clear. He had raised his children to believe in the old ways. And though he did not take the dark mark himself, he did nothing to stop his grandchildren from doing so. The house at Grimmauld Place became a meeting ground for Death Eaters, its wards hiding their gatherings from ministry detection. Portraits of long-dead Black ancestors would whisper encouragement to the young recruits, reminding them of their duty to the bloodline. But the most painful division was the one that occurred between the two brothers who had once shared a bedroom on the top floor. Sirius, now living with the Potters, had thrown his lot in with the Order of the Phoenix. He fought against everything his family stood for, and he fought with the same reckless passion that had once driven him to run away. Regulus, meanwhile, remained at home, the perfect son, the one who would restore the family's honour. He attended the secret meetings, listened to Voldemort's speeches, and eventually accepted the Dark Mark. To the outside world, he was the heir who had chosen the right path. Yet even within Regulus, a seed of doubt was planted. He saw the violence, the callousness, the way Voldemort used his followers as tools. He saw how the Dark Lord treated his own house elf, Kreacher, a creature bound to the Black family for generations. That moment, when Voldemort forced Kreacher to drink a potion that left him tormented, would become the turning point. But in the early days of the war, Regulus believed. He believed so deeply that he gave everything to the cause. The secret meetings at Grimmauld Place continued as the war escalated. Wizards and witches came and went under cover of darkness, their robes brushing against the dusty floorboards, their voices low and urgent. Walburga Black acted as a silent host, never fully participating but always present, a ghost of approval in the corner. She believed she was safeguarding the future of her family, but she was in truth presiding over its destruction, because the war did not just pit the Blacks against the rest of the wizarding world. It pitted them against each other. Sirius and Regulus, once brothers who had wrestled on the staircase, now stood on opposite sides of a battlefield. Bellatrix hunted down blood traitors with a vicious joy, while Andromeda sheltered Muggle-borns in her home. Narcissa played her careful game, trying to keep her family safe from both the Dark Lord and the Order. And Walburga, left alone in Grimmauld Place with only Kreacher and the portraits for company, watched her family tear itself apart. The Tapestry, that great monument to their purity, began to show more burn marks than names. First Sirius, then Andromeda, then later Regulus, though his would come after his death, when his betrayal was discovered. The house itself, which had once been a fortress of unity, became a tomb of lost hopes. The secret meetings eventually stopped, as the war turned more dangerous, and the Ministry began to hunt Death Eaters more aggressively. But the damage was done. The Black family had been divided by the very ideology they had championed. Voldemort promised them purity, but he delivered only bloodshed. He promised them power, but he delivered only loss. And in the end, the family that had once stood as a pillar of pure blood supremacy was left fractured, haunted by the ghosts of its own choices. The story of the rise of the Dark Lord is often told from the perspective of his enemies, but within the walls of Grimmauld Place, it was told from the inside. The Blacks did not just witness the rise of Voldemort, they helped usher it in, and the consequences of that choice would echo through the generations, long after the war had ended. As the war raged on, one young man in particular stood at the precipice of a decision that would define his legacy. He had already accepted the dark mark, already proven his loyalty, but the moment he watched Kreacher suffer, something inside him broke, and that break would lead to one of the most daring and tragic acts of defiance the wizarding world would ever see. The next chapter in this story is one of initiation, betrayal, and a secret that would lie hidden for nearly 2 decades, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. The First Wizarding War had torn the Black family apart, but the cracks had been forming long before Voldemort's rise. By the time Lord Voldemort began gathering his followers in earnest, the divided loyalties within the noble and most ancient House of Black had already been etched into the very walls of 12 Grimmauld Place. Andromeda had been burned from the Tapestry for marrying a Muggle-born. Sirius had been erased for running away, for choosing Gryffindor, for daring to call James Potter his brother. Those who remained, Walburga, Orion, Bellatrix, Narcissa, and the young Regulus, clung all the tighter to their creed of purity. The family's support for the Dark Lord was never born of desperation. It was a triumphant return to the old ways, a chance to reclaim the power they believed was their birthright. For Regulus Black, the second son, the golden boy, the quiet one who never caused a single scandal, the path ahead seemed clear. At 16 years old, he would prove his worth once and for all. It happened in the summer of 1977, just after Regulus had finished his 5th year at Hogwarts. He had returned home to Grimmauld Place with a letter that made his mother weep with joy. Not from sorrow, but from a pride so intense it seemed to fill the entire Dark House. Regulus had been invited to join the Death Eaters. The Dark Lord himself had extended the offer, presumably through the influence of Bellatrix, who had already risen to become one of Voldemort's most trusted and fanatical servants. The Blacks had long awaited this moment. For Walburga, it was vindication. Her younger son had not only embraced the family's values, but had earned the favour of the most powerful wizard of the age. For Orion, it was the quiet satisfaction of legacy restored. Sirius had been a disgrace, a stain upon the family name, but Regulus would carry the torch of the House of Black into a new era. The initiation itself was not a public spectacle. There was no grand ceremony in the halls of Malfoy Manor, no crowd of masked figures to applaud. The Dark Lord preferred intimacy, a private ritual that bound the recruit to him with fear and awe. Regulus was brought to a location known only to a few, perhaps a dimly lit chamber in an old manor or a forgotten cellar hidden beneath the London streets. There, in the presence of the Dark Lord and a handful of senior Death Eaters, he knelt. The family motto echoed in his mind as Voldemort pressed his wand to Regulus's left forearm. The pain was immediate, searing, like liquid fire being poured beneath the skin. The dark mark took shape slowly, a skull emerging from the agony, a serpent coiling from its mouth. Regulus had expected something romantic, almost sacred, a symbol of his devotion, a mark that would set him apart from the unworthy. Instead, he felt the raw, invasive reality of it. The skin burned for days after, a constant reminder that this mark did not simply signify loyalty, it demanded complete surrender. In the days that followed, Walburga and Orion could not stop looking at their son's arm. They would ask him to roll up his sleeve at the dinner table, just to see the mark. Walburga would trace her fingers over it, her eyes glistening, whispering words of praise mixed with the hopes of generations. She saw the fulfillment of every ambition she had ever held for the family. The prophecy that the House of Black would rise again, that it would stand at the right hand of the new order, was finally coming true. Orion, ever stoic, simply nodded, but his pride was palpable. At last, a son he could be proud of. At last, someone to carry the burden that Sirius had so callously abandoned. They did not see the flicker of doubt in Regulus's eyes, the way he sometimes stared at his own reflection in the dark windows of Grimmauld Place, as if searching for the boy he had been before the mark was burned into his flesh. But the reality of being a Death Eater was far from the whispered tales that had filled the family's dinner conversations. Regulus had imagined himself as a soldier for a noble cause, a purifier of the magical world, a knight in service of the Dark Lord's vision. What he encountered instead was terror dressed in robes. The meetings were not councils of strategy. They were exhibitions of cruelty. The Dark Lord did not inspire loyalty through charisma alone. He wielded pain as naturally as he wielded magic. Regulus watched Bellatrix cackle as she tortured a muggle-born for sport. He saw the bodies of those who had displeased the Dark Lord left as warnings, and he felt, for the first time, the weight of the promise he had made, not to the Dark Lord, but to his mother. For a time, he tried to bury that discomfort. He threw himself into missions, into the rituals of servitude, believing that the ends would justify the means. But the mark on his arm never stopped aching. It seemed to throb with every act of violence, every scream that echoed in the dark chambers. The romanticized version of the Death Eater, the version he had believed in at 16, the version his mother had celebrated, turned out to be a lie. The truth was that the dark mark was not a badge of honor. It was a leash that tightened the more you struggled. By the end of that summer, Regulus had begun to keep a secret journal, hidden beneath the floorboards of his bedroom at Grimmauld Place. In it, he wrote words he could never speak aloud. He wrote of his fears, his doubts, his growing horror at the things he had seen and done. And he wrote about a strange, quiet hope that somewhere, somehow there might be a way to undo what he had become. But first, he would have to learn a secret so terrible that it would change his fate forever. The Horcrux secret. Regulus's change of heart is the next chapter in this story, and it reveals how a young man who had given everything to serve the Dark Lord found the courage to defy him, even at the cost of his own life. But the pride Walburga and Orion felt in their youngest son was built on a fragile foundation, a gilded cage of expectation that Regulus himself was finally beginning to understand the true price of. He had achieved everything they had ever wanted for him. He was a Death Eater. The dark mark burned into his forearm was the ultimate badge of honor, a confirmation that the Black family's loyalty to the pure blood cause was beyond question. But the door that this mark opened revealed not a glorious empire of wizarding supremacy. It revealed a charnel house, and the illusion of a noble cause shattered in a single, brutal act of cruelty that Regulus was never meant to witness. Voldemort was meticulous. He trusted no one, not even his most devoted followers. When he needed to test the defenses of the hidden artifact he had secreted away in the seaside cave, he could not risk one of his Death Eaters seeing how the protections worked. He needed a test subject, a piece of living magic he could use and discard without consequence. He summoned Kreacher, the bond between a house elf and an ancient wizarding family is the deepest, most unbreakable magic there is. Kreacher had no choice. He was ripped from the kitchen at 12 Grimmauld Place by the summons of the Dark Lord and deposited onto the shores of a bleak black lake hidden beneath a cliff. Voldemort forced Kreacher to drink the potion in the basin. The potion forced the house elf to relive every horrible memory of his long life. He screamed in agony for his mistress, for Regulus, for water. His throat burned as though he had swallowed fire, and he begged the Dark Lord for a single sip of relief. Voldemort did nothing. He stood there, watching, cold and calculating, as the creature suffered. He needed the potion emptied. When the basin was clear, Voldemort placed the locket inside, refilled the basin with the poison, and abandoned Kreacher to die alone in the darkness. But Voldemort made one crucial error. He gave Kreacher a command to return home. The magic of that command was stronger than the poison. Kreacher disapparated from the floor of the cave on the brink of death and collapsed in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place. When Regulus returned home, he found Kreacher sitting in the dark, emaciated, traumatized, clutching his chest, and Kreacher told his young master everything. That was the turning point. Regulus Arcturus Black was a product of his upbringing. He believed in blood purity. He believed the Dark Lord was the champion of their world, the leader who would restore the proper order, but he was not a monster. The casual, sadistic cruelty inflicted on his family's house elf, a creature he had grown up with, a symbol of the Black family's very household, was a violation of everything Regulus was taught the family stood for. It was the moment he understood what he had truly signed up for. Voldemort did not hate only Muggles and Muggle-borns. He hated everyone. He saw all life as disposable, including the lives of his most loyal servants. Regulus sat in his room that night, staring at the dark mark on his arm, and he realized the truth. The quest for immortality was not a means to secure a glorious future for the wizarding world. The quest was the entire goal. It was a selfish, obscene abomination that required a wizard to tear his own soul into pieces and force others to suffer endlessly for its preservation. Regulus finally understood that he was not a soldier in a righteous war. He was a cog in a machine designed to elevate one man to godhood, regardless of the cost in blood and suffering. And for the first time in his life, Regulus Black felt true, overwhelming shame. He did not want to be a part of this. He could not be a part of this. He was terrified of the Dark Lord, but the terror was overwhelmed by a deeper, quieter resolve. He could not walk away. He had to destroy what he had helped to create. Regulus began his secret investigation. He was clever, always the intellectual counterpart to his brother's reckless passion. He pieced together the clues. He understood what Voldemort had done. The locket was a Horcrux. The Dark Lord had torn his soul. Regulus knew that Lucius Malfoy had been entrusted with something dark, and he knew Bellatrix had something precious locked away in her vault at Gringotts. He did not know where all the pieces of the Dark Lord's soul were hidden, but he knew exactly where one of them was. He knew how to get back to that cave. The secret investigation led Regulus to a desperate, lonely conclusion. He could not defeat the Dark Lord in open combat, but he could steal a part of him. He could take the Horcrux. He took Kreacher into his confidence and made the elf swear to obey his commands. He ordered Kreacher to take him to the cave, and he forged a replacement, a simple, identical locket. Inside it, he placed a note for Voldemort to find, a final act of defiance that perfectly captured the transformation in Regulus's heart, an admission that he had stolen the real Horcrux and intended to destroy it. On the shore of that dark lake, Regulus knew what was coming. He forced Kreacher to force him to drink the potion. He took the suffering upon himself. He endured the agony that the house elf had suffered, screaming until his voice failed. When the basin was empty, he crawled to the edge, ordered Kreacher to switch the lockets, and gave him the Horcrux. He commanded Kreacher to go home and destroy it. He told him not to tell his mother. Then the Inferi rose from the water. They dragged Regulus under the surface. Kreacher tried to save him, but Regulus's command was absolute. Kreacher disapparated, clutching the locket, leaving his master to drown in the darkness with the dead. Regulus Black was dead at 18, the perfect son, the Death Eater, the boy who was supposed to restore the glory of the House of Black. He died alone in the cold, betrayed by the very cause he had once embraced. But he died a rebel. He died fighting the Dark Lord with the only weapon he had left, his own life and his own will. The Locket Kreacher, brought back, sat in the drawing room at Grimmauld Place for years, a poisoned dark relic that no one understood. The secret of the cave and the heroic death of this forgotten son is exactly where our journey takes us next. The moment Regulus Black understood what Voldemort had done to Kreacher, something inside him cracked. It wasn't just the cruelty, though that alone would have been enough to turn a decent soul. It was the scale of the deception, the casual way the Dark Lord had used a defenseless creature as a test subject, and then left him to die in a cave full of inferi. Kreacher had only been ordered to follow his master's instructions, and that loyalty had nearly cost him his life. Regulus had given the order himself. He had lent Kreacher to the Dark Lord without a second thought, and now he knew the truth. Voldemort had created a Horcrux, and he had hidden it in a place so terrible that even the bravest wizard might never return alive. But Regulus was determined to return, or rather, he was determined to see that the Horcrux was destroyed, even if it cost him everything. He made a plan. It was simple, audacious, and fatal. He would take Kreacher with him to the seaside cave where the locket was hidden, and he would do what Voldemort had not anticipated. He would replace the real Horcrux with a fake, and then he would ensure the Dark Lord could never reclaim his piece of soul. The key was the potion, the drink of despair as it would later be called, the magical barrier that Voldemort had placed in the basin to guard the locket. Regulus knew from Kreacher's account that the potion caused unbearable thirst and hallucinations, and that to retrieve the locket, one had to drink every last drop. Kreacher had been forced to drink it, and the memory had nearly destroyed him. Regulus made a choice that defined the rest of his short life. He would drink the potion himself. He would not force Kreacher to suffer that agony again, and he would die if necessary. Because if Voldemort's magic was as cruel as he suspected, there was no way to complete the task and survive. On a cold night in 1979, Regulus and Kreacher apparated to the cliffside cave. The entrance was hidden in the rock, accessible only by magic and a boat that appeared when summoned. The journey across the dark lake was silent, the water unnaturally still, the air thick with the scent of salt and decay. Regulus knew what lurked beneath the surface, the inferi, the corpses animated by Voldemort's dark magic, waiting for any living soul to approach, but he did not turn back. He stepped onto the island in the center of the lake, and there it was, the stone basin, the green potion glowing like poison, and the locket glittering at the bottom. Regulus did not hesitate. He told Kreacher to wait at the shore, to take the fake locket he had prepared, and to return to Grimmauld Place, no matter what happened. And then he began to drink. The potion was agony. It burned his throat, clawed at his mind, forced him to relive his worst fears and deepest regrets. He saw Sirius laughing at him. He saw his mother's disappointed face. He saw Voldemort's red eyes. He saw the faces of the Muggle-borns he had once helped persecute. But he kept drinking. He drank until the basin was empty, and the locket lay exposed. He took it. He placed the fake locket inside, and he left a note, a letter of defiance that would not be found for years. And then, as his strength failed, as the inferi rose from the lake and dragged him under the black water, Regulus Black died. He died alone in the dark, for a cause he had only recently embraced. He died saving a house elf, and in doing so, he struck a blow against the most powerful Dark Lord of the age. The tragic irony is that no one knew, not for nearly 2 decades. His parents believed he had died on a mission for the Dark Lord, perhaps even with honor. Walburga and Orion grieved their son, but they never understood the truth of his sacrifice. Sirius believed his brother had been a loyal Death Eater to the end, a servant of evil who had gotten what he deserved. The family tapestry showed Regulus's name intact. He had not been burned off for treason, because no one knew he had committed any. He was simply a dead son, a lost prince of the Black Dynasty, remembered only as a footnote in the war. It took the intervention of Kreacher himself, years later, to reveal the full story. When Harry Potter inherited 12 Grimmauld Place, the old house elf carried the secret of his last master's true courage, and when he told it, the wizarding world learned that Regulus Arcturus Black, the Death Eater, the brother of Sirius, had been a hero all along. He had turned against the Dark Lord. He had stolen the Horcrux. He had given his life to destroy what Voldemort held most precious. But that revelation came too late for anyone to thank him. Too late for Sirius to know his brother had not been lost to evil. Too late for the Black family to learn that one of their own had broken the pattern of cruelty and devotion to blood purity. Regulus's death remained a quiet, forgotten tragedy until it became a crucial piece in the puzzle of how to defeat Lord Voldemort. The cave, meanwhile, remained sealed. The inferior returned to their slumber. The fake Locket sat in the basin, mocking anyone who came looking for the real Horcrux. And the Dark Lord, when he finally checked on his hiding place, found only a note that read, "To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. R.A.B." That note, written in a trembling hand, was the only evidence that Regulus Black had ever existed. It was his final act, his gift to a world that would not know his name for another 17 years. And when the story came to light, it changed everything. Not just for Harry, but for the very legacy of the House of Black. But while Regulus lay at the bottom of a cold lake, the tide of the First Wizarding War was turning. Voldemort was growing stronger, bolder. The Potters were in hiding. Sirius was in Azkaban, betrayed by a friend he had trusted with his life. And in that same year, another betrayal was brewing, one that would shatter the remaining hope of the Order of the Phoenix and send a man to a prison that would break him far more than any cave ever could. That story, the story of James and Lily Potter, the fall of Sirius, and the 12 years of lies that followed, is the one that awaits us in our next chapter. If the story of Regulus Black is one of a secret redemption swallowed by the dark, then the story of his older brother Sirius is one of a man whose entire identity was forged in defiance of his blood. But fate has a terrible sense of symmetry. The last true heir of the House of Black would not die in a cave, but in a battle. And before that battle, he would spend 12 years in a prison built for the worst of souls, accused of the very crime his brother had died trying to prevent. The war against Voldemort reached its absolute peak in the autumn of 1981. The Dark Lord had heard the prophecy, the one about the boy born at the end of July. He had chosen the Potters. James and Lily knew they were marked. They went into hiding, and the Order of the Phoenix devised the Fidelius Charm, one of the most complex pieces of magic ever created. The concept was simple but devastatingly effective: to hide a secret in a living soul, a secret keeper. The obvious choice for secret keeper was Sirius Black. He was James's best friend, the godfather to their son. He would die before giving them up, and that was exactly the problem. Everyone expected it. Voldemort would hunt Sirius first, so Sirius proposed a decoy, a brilliant, reckless plan born from the arrogance of a man who thought he could outthink a Dark Lord. They would switch the target. They would make Peter Pettigrew the secret keeper instead. Nobody would ever suspect Pettigrew. He was weak, overlooked, the one everyone kept around out of pity or comfortable habit. But Peter Pettigrew had a need for power that ran deeper than his loyalty. He went to Voldemort, and in exchange for his own worthless skin, he traded the lives of his two best friends. On the night of October 31st, James and Lily Potter were murdered in their home. The wards fell, and so did the first domino in the fall of Sirius Black. When Sirius arrived at the destroyed cottage in Godric's Hollow, the war was already over. He saw Hagrid taking Harry. He gave Hagrid his flying motorcycle, desperate to chase the one man responsible for the wreckage. He found Peter Pettigrew in the middle of a crowded Muggle street, and Peter, faced with the man he had betrayed, did the one thing Sirius never anticipated. He screamed. He painted himself as the victim, publicly accused Sirius of the betrayal, and then blasted the street apart with a hidden wand. 12 Muggles died in the explosion. Peter severed his own finger to make it look like a corpse, transformed into a rat, and disappeared into the sewer grates, leaving Sirius standing alone in the rubble screaming for justice. The reason the wizarding world believed this lie so easily lies entirely in a name: Black. The stigma of the noble and most ancient House of Black was so deeply ingrained in magical society that the idea of the last heir-turning traitor was not a shock. It was a confirmation of every prejudice held against his family. Sirius had spent his entire life fighting against their reputation, burning himself off their tapestry. But he could not escape their shadow. The Ministry, led by Barty Crouch, was desperate for a swift victory lap. The war was over. People needed a villain to hate, and a black heir was the perfect, acceptable scapegoat. No trial was ever held. Sirius was sentenced to Azkaban, without a single word of defense allowed to cross his lips. He was the last black heir, betrayed by a rat and abandoned by the very world he had fought to protect. Sirius Black entered Azkaban in the winter of 1981. A man stripped of everything. His best friends were dead. His godson was lost to him. His name was synonymous with treachery. The walls of Azkaban closed around him, and the world, exhausted by war, was only too happy to forget the last black heir existed at all. The story of Sirius Black should have ended there, in the cold silence of his cell. But the silence, it would not last forever. The world believed Sirius Black had betrayed his closest friends when Peter Pettigrew staged his own death, framing Sirius for the murder of 13 people. The wizarding world did not hesitate. They saw what they wanted to see: a Black, born into the darkest pureblood house, finally showing his true colours. No one questioned how a man who had rejected everything his family stood for could suddenly commit such an atrocity. They simply locked him away, and so Sirius Black was sent to Azkaban without trial. No wand, no voice, no hope. The island fortress rose from the grey sea like a broken tooth, its walls humming with despair. Every cell was a tomb, every corridor a memory of misery. For a man who had already lost his best friends, who carried the guilt of suggesting the switch to Secret Keeper, the silence must have been unbearable. But Sirius did not break. Not in the way the Dementors expected. You see, the Dementors feed on happiness. They drain hope, replace it with cold and emptiness. Most prisoners lose their minds within weeks. But Sirius had something they could not touch. He knew the truth. He knew he was innocent. And that small, fragile seed of certainty became his anchor. In the darkest hours, when the Dementors pressed against his cell door, Sirius held on to memories that were not joyful in the conventional sense. He remembered James laughing. He remembered the feeling of flying beside him on a broom, the wind in their hair. He remembered Lily's kindness, the way she forgave him for his family's sins. These were not happy memories that the Dementors could drain away. They were truths, and truth, it turns out, is harder to destroy than happiness. But there was another layer to his survival. Sirius Black was an unregistered animagus. He had transformed into a large black dog for years, running alongside James in his stag form. That animal nature, that primal connection to a creature without guilt or grief, gave him a refuge. In his cell, when the human mind could no longer bear the weight of memory, Sirius would shift. He would become Padfoot, silent, instinctual, driven only by the need to endure. The Dementors could not drain what was not human. They could not tear apart a dog's simple will to live. And so for 12 years, Sirius lived in a cycle of transformation and silence. He learned to hide his human thoughts beneath fur and stillness. He became invisible to the Dementors in the only way possible: by ceasing to exist as a man in those moments. It was not madness. It was survival, and it required a strength that the Black family had never acknowledged. The family's reaction to his imprisonment was cold and final. Walburga Black, his mother, did not mourn. She did not visit. She burned his name from the family tapestry with the same fury she had used when he ran away at 16. To the House of Black, Sirius was a double failure. First, he had rejected their purity, their traditions, their very identity, and now he had proven himself a traitor to his own friends, confirming every dark suspicion they had held about him. They saw his imprisonment not as a tragedy, but as proof. Proof that blood always tells. Proof that a Black who tries to escape his nature will eventually fall. They did not know he was innocent. They did not care. In their eyes, the name Sirius Black had already been erased. He was no longer their son, their cousin, their heir. He was a stain on their legacy, and Azkaban was simply the final cleaning. But Sirius endured. He endured for 12 years, alone in that cell, with only the truth and the dog to keep him company. He endured because he knew that one day he would find a way out. He knew that Peter Pettigrew was still alive, hiding, and that the world needed to know the truth. He endured because he still had something to fight for. And then one night he saw a newspaper, a photograph of the Weasley family in Egypt, and in that photograph a rat with one missing toe. Sirius knew instantly Peter was alive, and Peter was at Hogwarts. That was the moment the silence broke. That was the moment Sirius Black began to plan his escape. The Dementors could not hold him any longer, because now he had hope again, and hope, even more than truth, is something the Dementors cannot truly destroy. But before we follow Sirius into the storm of his escape, we must turn our attention to another member of the Black family, one who watched her cousin's imprisonment with cold satisfaction, one whose fanaticism had not yet reached its full terrible peak. In the same years that Sirius withered in Azkaban, Bellatrix Lestrange was not idle. She was perfecting her devotion to the Dark Lord, sharpening her cruelty and preparing for a war that would eventually destroy her, and her most infamous act of violence was still ahead, an act that would leave two of the Order's finest minds shattered forever. The Longbottom torture would become her signature, a testament to what happens when obsession and loyalty meet no resistance. In the silence of Azkaban, Sirius Black endured more than 12 years of despair, trapped within walls that fed on hope. But while he suffered alone, his innocence an invisible shield against the Dementors' kiss, the world outside had already moved on. The First Wizarding War was over, but the scars it left behind were far from healed, and the darkest chapter of that aftermath began not in a courtroom, but in the quiet countryside of a neighbourhood that had once known peace. The Longbottoms lived in a modest home, not far from where the Potters had been betrayed. Frank and Alice were Aurors, brave and dedicated, members of the original Order of the Phoenix. They had survived the war, fought alongside the Potters and the Lupines, and after Voldemort's fall, they hoped to raise their son Neville in a world free from terror. But the war had not ended for everyone. For the fanatics who remained loyal to the Dark Lord, Voldemort's disappearance was not a defeat. It was a betrayal, and they believed that the key to his return lay in the secrets the Longbottoms might have been forced to keep. It was a warm evening in early May, about a month after the Potters' deaths. Frank and Alice were at home with their infant son when the attack came. Bellatrix Lestrange, accompanied by her husband Rodolphus, his brother Rabastan, and their ally Barty Crouch Jr., apparated into the garden with the fury of true believers. They did not come to kill, they came to break, and they brought with them the Cruciatus Curse, the most painful of the unforgivables, wielded with a precision that only someone as fanatical as Bellatrix could master. The torture lasted for hours. Bellatrix's voice, shrill and wild, demanded information. Anything about the Dark Lord's whereabouts, about his plans, about any artifact or spell the Longbottoms might have known. But Frank and Alice had no such knowledge. They were not Death Eaters, not confidants of Voldemort. They were simply good people who had fought on the side of light. And yet, Bellatrix believed that every loyal servant of the Dark Lord was a potential traitor. She believed that anyone who had opposed him must have known something. Her logic was twisted by obsession, by a love for a master who had never truly loved anyone back. By the time the Ministry Auras arrived, alerted by neighbours who heard screams that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, Frank and Alice Longbottom were barely recognisable. Their minds had been shattered. They would never again speak a full sentence, never again recognise their own son. They were committed to St. Mungo's, where they would spend the rest of their days in a ward for permanent spell damage, occasionally showing flashes of awareness that only deepened the tragedy. Their son Neville, then just a toddler, was raised by his grandmother, who never quite forgave the world for what happened. The trial that followed was one of the most infamous in wizarding history. Bellatrix Lestrange and her cohorts stood before the Wizengamot, a panel of judges that included many who had once feared the Dark Lord's rise. The evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses had seen the group entering the Longbottom home. The victim's condition was clear, and yet Bellatrix showed no remorse. Instead, she used the courtroom as a stage to declare her undying loyalty. She stood tall, her dark hair wild, her eyes blazing with the same madness that had driven her to torture innocent people. Her voice rang clear and defiant. "The Dark Lord will rise again," she proclaimed. "He will reward those who have remained faithful. We have not betrayed him. We have only sought to serve him, even in his absence." When the Chief Warlock sentenced her to life in Azkaban, she did not flinch. She smiled. For Bellatrix, imprisonment was not a punishment. It was a badge of honour. She was a true Black after all. The family motto, Toujours pur, meant more than purity of blood. It meant purity of loyalty. And in her mind, no one in the Black family had been more pure than she. The Lestranges and Barty Crouch Jr. were taken to the fortress that guarded the North Sea. But while Rodolphus and Rabastan eventually seemed to retreat into silence, Bellatrix thrived in Azkaban. She wore her chains like jewellery, boasting to the Dementors and whispering prophecies that no one could hear. She was not broken by the cold or the darkness. She was nourished by it. For the true Blacks, Azkaban was not a prison. It was a shrine to their faith. Years later, when Sirius Black escaped, he would find himself hunted by the very Dementors that had once been his jailers. But that story belongs to another chapter. For now, the Longbottoms were lost, Bellatrix was caged, and the wizarding world believed the nightmare was over. But in the depths of Azkaban, the dog who had once run free was already beginning to dream of escape. And in the shadows, the echoes of Bellatrix's defiance were only the beginning. Up next, in Chapter 22, we follow the thread of that escape. The moment the dog returned to London, and the quiet revolution that began with a stolen newspaper. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The Longbottom screams faded into the walls of St. Mungo's, but the echo of Bellatrix's defiance lingered in the wizarding world. She had been sent to Azkaban without remorse, her fanaticism sealed behind stone and iron. But while she rotted in the dark, another Black was already plotting his own escape. A different kind of flight, born not from loyalty to the Dark Lord, but from the desperate need for justice. Sirius Black had spent 12 years trapped in the same fortress that held his cousin. The Dementors could not steal his soul, not entirely. His innocence formed a shield, and his animagus form, the shaggy black dog, gave him an anchor. But it was a photograph in a newspaper that finally shattered his silence. One morning, a guard's discarded Daily Prophet slid across the cell floor, and there, staring back at him, was the face of Peter Pettigrew, alive, fat, unrepentant. He was posing as the Weasley family's pet rat, Scabbers, and had been living in plain sight for a decade. That single image burned through Sirius like lightning. The truth, long buried in his chest, now demanded action. He had been framed for murder. The traitor was still breathing, and the boy he had sworn to protect. Harry Potter was in danger because Pettigrew would stop nothing to return to Voldemort's side. Sirius knew that if Peter felt threatened, he wouldn't hesitate to deliver Harry to the Dark Lord, just as he had delivered James and Lily. The Dementor's kiss no longer seemed the worst fate. Letting Peter escape would be far worse, so the dog slipped out. On a stormy night, during the chaos of a prison breakout that the Ministry would later call the most brazen in centuries, Sirius transformed and padded through the bars, leaving Azkaban behind. The Dementors, distracted by the tumult, did not notice a four-legged shadow disappearing into the mist. He swam the freezing channel to the mainland, and then began his long journey north, always following the scent of a rat. For months, Sirius lived as a fugitive, sleeping in ditches, scavenging food, his human mind hidden behind canine eyes. He became a rumor. Wizards whispered of a mass murderer on the loose, a madman who had cracked under the pressure and now prowled the countryside for vengeance. The Ministry dispatched Aurors. The Daily Prophet ran headlines comparing him to the darkest legends, but Sirius was not hunting random victims. He was hunting one specific rat, and that rat was hiding at Hogwarts. The castle, however, was impossible to breach directly. He had to wait. He had to watch. And so he returned to the one place he swore he would never set foot in again. 12. Grimmauld Place, his childhood home. The townhouse stood in its silent row, hidden from Muggle eyes by ancient enchantments. Sirius slipped inside through the garden door, and the moment his paws touched the dusty floorboards, he felt the weight of generations press down on him. The portrait of his mother screamed, as always, but her curses could not touch him now. He was a ghost in his own house. He crept through the rooms, avoiding the family tapestry where his face had been burned away. The house elf Kreacher appeared, gaunt and resentful, muttering about blood traitors and bringing shame upon the noble and most ancient house of Black. Sirius ignored him. He needed supplies, maps, potions, information, and he needed to stay hidden until the moment he could reveal Peter Pettigrew to the world. That moment came at the end of Harry Potter's third year. Sirius, still in his animagus form, managed to slip into Hogwarts grounds during the chaos of the final exams. He found Harry, Hermione, and Ron in the Shrieking Shack, where the truth finally spilled out. Sirius forced Peter to confess, to admit that he had been the secret keeper all along, that he had framed Sirius, that he had caused the deaths of James and Lily. The confrontation was raw, filled with years of grief and rage, but just as justice seemed within reach, Peter transformed and escaped into the darkness, leaving Sirius once again as the man the world believed to be a killer. The Order of the Phoenix, however, knew better now. Albus Dumbledore believed Sirius. Remus Lupin stood by him. And Harry, who had grown so like James, finally understood that his godfather was not a monster. He was family. The clearing of Sirius's name came not through a trial, but through trust. In the eyes of those who mattered, he was no longer the traitor. He was the dog who had returned to London, not for vengeance alone, but for redemption. And so, when the summer of 1995 arrived, Sirius found himself back at 12 Grimmauld Place, not as a fugitive, but as the rightful owner of the house he had once fled. The old walls still creaked with prejudice. The portraits still hissed their curses. But now the building held a different purpose. It became the headquarters for a new order of the Phoenix. And the next chapter of this story begins with those strange folded-over house members gathering in the parlour, never realising that the most powerful secrets of the Black family were still hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The dog that had slept in the shadows of Azkaban for 12 years had finally returned to its kennel. But number 12, Grimmauld Place, was no haven. It was a sarcophagus of the past, lined with the screaming portraits of ancestors who wished him dead. Sirius Black came back here, not as a homecoming, but as a fugitive, vanishing into the only place the Ministry and the Death Eaters would never think to look. A house full of traps, concealed by ancient magic and invisible to all who did not know its secrets. He arrived in his dog form, Padfoot, padding silently across the dust-covered carpets of a home that had never loved him. The chandeliers were cocooned in sheets. The curtains were drawn against the daylight. The only sound was the crackling of the gas lamps and the muttering of Kreacher, the house elf, who could not believe his eyes when the disowned heir returned. Sirius had walked back into the belly of the beast to hide from the world, and he hated himself for it. But out of that grim necessity, something strategic was born. The Order of the Phoenix was rising again. Dumbledore needed a base of operations. Somewhere off the Ministry's radar, somewhere old magic could protect them from Voldemort's spies. Sirius offered his hated ancestral home without hesitation. It was a gesture of deep defiance wrapped in a profound sadness. "Take it," he said. "Do what you want with it. Burn it to the ground if it helps." And just like that, the noble and most ancient House of Black became the command center for the resistance. The irony was thick enough to choke on. The very temple of pure blood supremacy was now the war room for the army trying to tear it down. Every surface in that house was a monument to the ideology of blood purity. The tapestry of the family tree dominated the hallway, its gold thread spelling out the names of ancestors who had married their cousins to keep the line pure. The burns where Sirius and Andromeda had been blasted off the tree were scars of rebellion. And now the house was filled with Muggleborns, half-bloods, and blood traitors walking past that tapestry every single day. Moody stomped over the Persian rugs with his wooden leg. Tonks changed her hair colour at the kitchen table, giggling with Remus Lupin. Kingsley Shacklebolt's deep voice echoed in the drawing room, where Walburga Black's portrait still hung, shrieking her hatred every time someone walked by. The house became a fortress, ripped from the enemy's arsenal and turned against them. But the architect of that victory paid the highest for it. Every day Sirius Black spent within those walls was a day spent fighting ghosts. He could not leave. He was the most wanted man in the wizarding world, hunted for a crime he did not commit. His war was fought daily against the memory of his mother, the servitude of Kreacher, and the crushing silence of a house that felt like a tomb. He paced the rooms as Padfoot, because the human form felt too vulnerable. He tore at the curtains, ripped the rotting fabric, tried to find an escape that did not exist. The boy who had run away at 16 to live in a flat with a Muggle girlfriend and a motorbike was now trapped in the very symbol of the world he had escaped. His laughter in the kitchen was always a little too loud, a little too frantic. He threw himself into the Order's business with reckless energy because stillness meant the walls closed in. He was the Order's greatest asset, a man who knew the Death Eaters' minds, who knew the layout of the Ministry, who had the Black name and the Black Vaults to fund the war, but he was also its biggest liability, simply because this place was slowly breaking his spirit again. Imagine the atmosphere of that house, the smell of damp and dust and dark magic, the tinkling of Kreacher's voice, muttering curses under his breath as he polished the silver, the scream of Walburga Black's portrait every time a light was turned on. For the members of the Order, it was a curious haunted house, a strange headquarters with a tragic past. For Sirius, it was a visit to his own grave. He provided the base, but the base consumed him. And deep within the bowels of this house, Kreacher hoarded the secrets of the family that owned him. He held a locket no one could open. He cradled a story of a master he actually loved, a master who had died in a horrible cave by the sea. The entire history of the Order's headquarters depended on the loyalty of a house elf who despised his new master. The truth of the locket and the truth of Regulus Black's sacrifice was locked inside Kreacher's mind. The story of how the headquarters truly became the headquarters, and the final secret of the Black bloodline, is a tale told only by a house elf. That is Kreacher's tale. The Order of the Phoenix had taken root in the very heart of the darkness they sought to destroy. 12 Grimmauld Place, the ancestral home of the noble and most ancient House of Black, now buzzed with the quiet, determined energy of war. But a house that has absorbed centuries of pure blood dogma does not surrender its secrets lightly. It does not surrender its servants lightly either. The most enduring inhabitant of that house, the keeper of its most painful truths, was not a member of the Order at all. He was a creature bound by chains older than the Dark Lord's rise. A creature whose loyalty had been fractured long before the Order ever set foot in the foyer. To understand the house, you must understand the elf. To understand the war, you must understand Kreacher. Kreacher was not just a house elf. He was a living artifact of the family's obsession with purity and servitude. Bound by ancient magic, his bond was forged with a particular intensity in the fires of Number 12. He was the family's confidant, their scapegoat, and their whipping boy all at once. He polished the silver, prepared the meals, and absorbed their prejudices like a dry sponge soaks up water. His hatred for Muggle-borns, for blood traitors, for anyone outside the inner circle of pure blood royalty, was not entirely his own. It was the echo of Mistress Walburga's voice, a voice he was magically and emotionally incapable of defying. This is the complex relationship between the Black family and their indentured servant. He was a member of the household, yet utterly disposable. He was trusted with their deepest secrets, yet treated as less than furniture. His entire existence was a contradiction, bound to a family that taught him to revere those who abused him. But Kreacher's heart was not a simple machine of survival. Like the family he served, his loyalty was split. On one side stood the formidable matriarch, Walburga Black. She was his mistress in the truest sense of the word. She gave him orders, demanded his obedience, and punished his failures. Kreacher feared her, respected her rigid devotion to the old ways, and echoed her venomous beliefs. To him, Walburga represented the authority, the tradition that must hold. And then there was Regulus, the younger son, the quiet one. While Sirius raged against the house and his mother, Regulus stayed. He absorbed the lessons of blood purity. But there was a gentleness in him that Kreacher recognized. Kreacher saw how Regulus struggled with the weight of the Black name. He saw the quiet boy who would speak to the elf, not just as a servant, but as a witness. When Regulus joined the Death Eaters, Kreacher felt a pride that was bitterly mixed with dread. He knew the darkness that lurked behind the Dark Mark, and it was Regulus's final command that shattered Kreacher's simple world. "Bring me," Regulus had said, his voice trembling, and Kreacher obeyed. He took his master to the seaside cave. He watched the Dark Lord perform terrible magic, and he was forced to drink a potion of unspeakable agony. He was discarded, left to die, a sacrifice for the ritual of immortality. But Regulus saved him. Regulus ordered him to escape, to take the locket, and to destroy it. In that moment, Kreacher's loyalty was no longer split. It broke entirely. The good master, the one who showed him a sliver of decency, was gone, sacrificed for a cause. Kreacher was only beginning to understand. The cruel mistress, Walburga, was dead, leaving behind only her portrait and her rage. Kreacher was left alone in the house, clutching a fake locket, driven mad by a command he could not fulfill. He tried everything. He could not destroy the Horcrux. The magic of the Dark Lord was impenetrable to the simple magic of a house elf, bound by a broken promise. So he waited. He grew bitter. He took out his pain on the Order, on Harry, on anyone who looked like they might be responsible for the fall of the House of Black. His loyalty had become a splintered weapon, turned inward. This brings us to the true history of the Locket, the relic of Salazar Slytherin, a symbol of the family's pride in their pureblood heritage, had been twisted into a vessel for the Dark Lord's soul. Regulus understood the horror of this. He understood that the quest for purity had led to the ultimate corruption. He gave his life to undo it. When Harry, Ron and Hermione stumbled into the enchanted lake of Kreacher's misery, they did not just find a locket. They found the final chapter of a tragedy. The revelation of the Locket's true history is not just about the Horcrux. It is about the redemption of the house elf. Kreacher, for so long a prisoner of his own bitterness, was finally given a purpose he could embrace. Harry, a master who shared blood with Regulus, gave Kreacher a new command. He gave him the Locket, the very symbol of his failure, and he tasked him with destroying it. But redemption is not found in the destruction of an object alone. It is found in the retelling of the story. When Kreacher told the tale to Harry, his voice cracked with a century of sorrow. He told them about the cave. He told them about the Inferi. He told them about Regulus's love for him. It was the first time anyone had truly listened to the house elf. It was the first time his suffering was not ignored. In that moment, Kreacher transformed. He was no longer the miserable, hateful creature who served the Order reluctantly. He became the proud standard-bearer of Regulus Black's last stand. He led the house elves of Hogwarts into battle. He fought for the memory of the good master. The redemption of the house elf was complete, not because he obeyed, but because he was finally understood. But the story of the Black family was not yet finished. The Locket was one piece of a puzzle that ran far deeper than anyone in the Order suspected. The links to the Dark Lord's final ambitions were woven directly into the Black family line, tangled up in a prophecy that had been sitting on a dusty shelf in the Department of Mysteries for 16 years. The secret that Dumbledore carried, the weapon that the Dark Lord coveted, it all led back to the children of this house. It all led back to the moment when the secrets of the family became the salvation of the wizarding world. A moment that would be sealed in the battle of the Department of Mysteries. Kreacher, bound by magic older and darker than most wizards could comprehend, found his loyalties shattered. He had served Regulus with a devotion that bordered on worship. But Walburga's cruel disdain had curdled his very nature. So when the Dark Lord came calling, Kreacher saw an opportunity not just to serve a new master, but to betray the one who had inherited him, Sirius Black. The house elf provided the crucial deception that lured Harry Potter, and by extension Sirius, directly into a trap. This trap was sprung not in some hidden cave or dark forest, but in the very heart of the Ministry of Magic itself. The Department of Mysteries is a place of profound strangeness. It exists beneath the Ministry, a labyrinth of chambers dedicated to the study of death, time, space, love and prophecy. When Harry and his friends arrived, drawn by a false vision of his godfather being tortured, they stepped into a perfect ambush. The Death Eaters were waiting. This was not a random skirmish. This was a convergence of history. The House of Black was about to tear itself apart. In the heart of the Ministry of Magic, here, in this silent circular chamber of prophecies, the fractures of an entire bloodline were about to split wide open. Bellatrix Lestrange, Sirius's cousin, was the orchestrator of this cruel theatre. She laughed as she toyed with the teenagers, her eyes wild with the joy of the hunt, and she knew deep down that her ultimate prize was not the prophecy, but the chance to finish what her family had started, the chance to destroy her own cousin. The Order of the Phoenix arrived just in time. Sirius burst into the room, his wand drawn, his face a mask of fury and relief. Seeing Harry alive, but facing his cousin Bellatrix, ignited a fire in him that had been banked for years. The duel between cousins, Sirius Black versus Bellatrix Lestrange, was not merely a fight to the death. It was the culmination of a lifetime of hatred. Bellatrix embodied everything Sirius had rejected: the pure blood mania, the cruelty, the blind devotion to blood supremacy. He mocked her, taunted her for being Voldemort's faithful servant. She laughed back, a high, cold cackle, reminding him that he was the failure, the blood traitor who had run away. Green light and red light filled the chamber. They were equally matched. Two of the most dangerous wizards of their generation, dancing a violent waltz that had been decades in the making. Sirius was winning. He was driving her back, his superior spellcraft and sheer will pushing her toward the end of the room. But hubris, or perhaps desperation, caught up with him. The tragic moment Sirius falls through the veil, witnessed by his godson, is perhaps the most haunting death in the entire series. The death chamber is dominated by a stone archway, ragged and ancient, draped with a shroud of black fabric that billows endlessly even in still air. This is the Veil of Death, the threshold between the world of the living and the world beyond. Bellatrix, stumbling backward, sent a stunning spell at Harry. Sirius, in that single fatal reflex of a godfather protecting his son, stepped forward to deflect it. The spell caught him square in the chest. The laughter died on his lips as he was thrown backward. He fell, not onto a stone floor, but through the veil. There was no scream, no dramatic cry of pain. He simply slipped through the ragged curtains, his eyes lifting toward Harry for one last moment. The archway stood silent. The cloth settled, and Sirius Black was gone. Harry screamed. He rushed forward, but Remus Lupin caught him, holding him back from the edge of the abyss. The weight of the moment crushed the air out of the room. The Black family's brightest rebel, the man who had escaped Azkaban and fought for love and friendship, had been silenced forever by the hand of his own blood. Harry chased Bellatrix through the ministry, consumed by a rage that threatened to shatter the last shreds of his control. He wanted to use the Cruciatus curse on her. He meant it. He was on the verge of becoming just as lost as she was. But Voldemort himself appeared, and Dumbledore arrived to meet him. In the chaos of the Dark Lord's duel with the headmaster, the immediate fate of the House of Black was sealed. Sirius was dead. The house on Grimmauld Place, that dark monument to the family's pride and paranoia, passed to Harry. The male line of the noble and most ancient House of Black ended on the floor of the Department of Mysteries. It did not die with a whimper, but with a crash of spellfire and a brother's fall. The legacy of Sirius would now live only in the fury of a boy for whom he had given everything. The tapestry of the Black family, burned and frayed, had lost its most vital thread. What happens to a house when its master is gone, and its secrets are guarded by a creature who mourns the old ways? The story of the Blacks was not quite over. The final chapter of its male line had been written in blood and silence, but the consequences would echo all the way to the final battle. And in that silence, a house elf found a new purpose. A locket waited to be found, and the sun stood alone against the night. When the dust settled in the Department of Mysteries, the silence was a physical weight. The veil, that ancient stone archway, swayed gently as if it had simply drawn another breath into its endless mouth. Bellatrix Lestrange's triumphant cackle faded down the endless corridors of the Ministry, leaving behind only the raw, primal sound of Harry Potter's grief. Sirius Black had fallen, and with him, the last Lord of the House of Black passed beyond the veil. But beyond the immediate tragedy of a godson losing a father, there is a colder, more clinical reality that takes hold in the days that followed. Sirius was dead, and Sirius was the last male of his direct line. His brother Regulus had preceded him into the darkness almost 2 decades earlier. Dying in a cave on the rocky coast of the Atlantic, his body never recovered, leaving no heir. The sprawling Black family tree, that tapestry of prejudice and pride that hung in the shadowy drawing room of 12 Grimmauld Place, had reached a critical dead end. The legal and genealogical implications of this death were profound. A house that had spent centuries carefully curating its bloodline, pruning away any branch it deemed unworthy by blasting holes in the fabric, had now, officially, snapped its main trunk. The male line of the House of Black did not slowly dwindle into obscurity. It was severed in a single violent moment in a room of prophecy and death. Let us trace the line, as the old families would have done in their solemn chronicles. Arcturus Black the Patriarch had 2 sons, Orion, who married Walburga, and Alphard, who never married. Orion and Walburga had Sirius and Regulus. The entire weight of the family name, the future of the noble and most ancient house, rested entirely on the shoulders of those 2 brothers. Regulus, the obedient son who tried to live up to his mother's expectations, joined the Death Eaters and then defected. He tried to undo Voldemort's work and paid the ultimate price. Sirius, the rebellious son, the Gryffindor, the man who rejected the entire premise of blood purity, was the last hope. He was the legal heir, but he despised everything the title represented. He had no children. He had no desire to continue a legacy he considered a curse. With his death, No legitimate male descendant of the main Black line existed anywhere in the wizarding world. The family that claimed to be royalty, that erased names for failing to live up to its impossible standards, had written its own final chapter. The name itself, as a title passed from father to son, was now a fossil, an echo in the empty halls of Grimmauld Place. And what of the family seat? What of the fortune, the dark artifacts, the miserable house elf Kreacher who had served the family for over a century? In an act of profound poetic justice, Harry Potter satisfied the requirements of the inheritance. Sirius, despite being estranged, had not been legally disowned by the time of his death. He had, in the eyes of the law, the right to name an heir, and he did. The castle, the gold at Gringotts, the gloomy terrace at number 12 Grimmauld Place, and every screaming portrait and cursed object within it, passed not to Narcissa Malfoy, not to Bellatrix Lestrange, not even to the quietly defiant Andromeda Tonks. It passed to a 15-year-old half-blood boy. Harry Potter became the master of the ancestral home of the Blacks. Let that sink into the silence of this chapter. The house that shouted its allegiance to pure blood, the house adorned with the shrunken heads of house elves and the regal, disdainful portraits of bigoted ancestors, now belonged to the boy who was the very embodiment of what the Blacks feared, the mixing of blood. The triumph of Voldemort's ideology within the family home was overturned by law. Harry inherited the burdens, the property, the accounts, the responsibilities. He owned the house that hated him. He became the master of Kreacher, the elf who had betrayed Sirius. The fortune of the Black family, amassed over centuries, was now funding the war against the pure-blood regime that had created it. But hidden within the clutter and dust of that inherited house, overlooked by everyone, was an object that held the ghost of Sirius's brother. A heavy golden locket, sitting inert on a drawing room shelf, contained the story of Regulus Black's redemption, a story of a brother's sacrifice, a house elf's impossible loyalty, and a dark secret stolen from the shore of a cursed lake. In the next chapter, we follow that locket, we call it, and it is a journey that will carry us from the cold depths of a seaside cave, through the grubby hands of the underworld, and directly into the heart of the war against the Dark Lord. It is perhaps the Black family's greatest and most unexpected contribution to the downfall of Voldemort. The legacy of Regulus Black was just beginning to unfold. With Sirius gone, the male line of the noble and most ancient House of Black had officially ended, but the story of the Black family was far from over. One final thread remained, a thread that had been woven decades earlier by a brother who had been dismissed as a coward, a traitor to his own blood, yet whose sacrifice would prove to be the first true crack in Voldemort's immortality. Regulus Arcturus Black. To the outside world, he was the perfect son, the obedient Death Eater, who knelt before the Dark Lord, who accepted the Dark Mark without question. But inside that cold, pure-blood shell, something had broken. It wasn't the ideology of blood purity that shattered him. It was the cruelty. It was the moment Voldemort demanded his house elf, Kreacher, for a task. And when Kreacher returned, half dead, forced to drink a poison that burned like fire, left to die in a cave filled with inferi, Regulus saw the truth. The Dark Lord did not value loyalty. He valued only power, and he would destroy anyone, even the most devoted followers, to achieve it. Regulus made a choice. He would steal the very object Voldemort had hidden in that cave. The locket that contained a piece of the Dark Lord's soul. He knew it would cost him his life, so he left a note for his mother, a confession. And then he commanded Kreacher to take him back to the cave, to switch the locket with a fake, and to flee. Kreacher obeyed, and Regulus drank the poison, was dragged into the icy water by the hands of the dead, and never returned. For years, the locket sat at 12 Grimmauld Place, hidden in a tangle of dark artifacts and forgotten history. Kreacher guarded it, treasured it as the last memory of his beloved master. But then the house became the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix. Sirius, the rebellious heir, had given the home away, and Kreacher, loyal to a fault, felt his bond to the family crumbling. He was left behind when the Order moved out, and in a moment of weakness, he was coaxed into revealing secrets by a Death Eater's son. Worse, Mundungus Fletcher, a thief and a lowlife, stole the locket from Grimmauld Place, not knowing its true value. He sold it for a pittance, and the locket passed into the hands of Dolores Umbridge, who wore it as a trophy, a symbol of her corrupt authority at the Ministry. And so began the long hunt. Harry, Ron and Hermione, on the run, desperate to destroy the Horcruxes, had no idea that the real locket had slipped through their fingers. They believed the locket was still in the cave. But when they finally journeyed there, they found only a fake and a note signed by R.A.B. Regulus Arcturus Black. It was the first time they understood that someone inside Voldemort's inner circle had already struck a blow. A loyal Black, the one who had supposedly died a Death Eater, had in fact been the first to defy the Dark Lord. The trio tracked the locket to Umbridge, infiltrated the Ministry in a daring heist, and finally retrieved it. But destroying it proved nearly impossible. The locket fought back, whispering dark thoughts, feeding on their fears. It was Ron who eventually broke it, taking the sword of Gryffindor and plunging it into the heart of the Horcrux. In that moment, as the shard of Voldemort screamed and dissolved into nothing, Regulus's sacrifice was completed. His death, his betrayal of the Dark Lord, his love for his house elf, all of it had led to this. The first blow against Voldemort's immortality had been struck by a Black who had chosen loyalty to what was right over loyalty to blood. And so the locket's journey came to an end. But the story of the Black family was not finished. There was still one more battle to be fought, one final stand where the last survivors of the house would collide. The last survivor of the direct bloodline, Bellatrix Lestrange, was still alive, and she was about to face the boy who had inherited everything from her cousin Sirius. The stage was set for the Battle of Hogwarts, the final stand of the Blacks. The destruction of Salazar Slytherin's locket in the Forest of Dean was a victory that echoed back through the decades, finally releasing Regulus Black from the silent, watery grave he had chosen for himself. But the war was not yet finished. The final act of the Second Wizarding War would be written in blood and fire at Hogwarts, and the Black family, fractured and frayed, would have no choice but to play their tragic parts. The Battle of Hogwarts was not a single moment, but a storm that gathered from every corner. Among the defenders were those who carried the heavy burden of the Black name. Andromeda Tonks had already lost her husband Ted to Snatchers. Now she watched her only child, Nymphadora, the daughter she had raised at the poisonous walls of Grimmauld Place, take her place in the fight. Nymphadora Tonks, a metamorph magus who had chosen love over blood purity, who married a werewolf and gave birth to a son with the same fierce loyalty as her mother, was the last rebel of the Black bloodline, and in the chaos of the battle, she fell. Bellatrix Lestrange, her aunt, the woman who embodied everything Andromeda had rejected, struck her down. The loss of Tonks was not just a military casualty, it was the death of the last chance the House of Black had at redemption through its younger, free-thinking generation. With Tonks gone, and her son Teddy Lupin left an orphan to be raised by his grandmother Andromeda, the rebellious branch of the family tree was severed forever. Bellatrix Lestrange was in her element. The battle was a stage for her madness, and she danced through it with a gleeful cruelty that had defined her entire life. Her curses flew wildly, and her laughter cut through the clash of spells. It was the laughter of pure, unhinged victory. She had already killed her own cousin, and now she sought to destroy the very heart of the resistance. When she turned her wand on Ginny Weasley, a student, a child of the family she despised, she crossed a line she could not understand. Molly Weasley, who had lost her own brothers to this war, who had raised her children with warmth, instead of the cold tyranny of pure-blood dogma, stepped forward. The duel between Molly Weasley and Bellatrix Lestrange was the final, explosive clash between two opposing ideologies. The protective, unyielding love of a mother against the sterile, violent fanaticism of a blood purist. Bellatrix mocked her, screaming that Molly would never truly be their mother. But Bellatrix had never understood that true strength did not come from blood, but from the heart. Molly's curse struck Bellatrix square in the chest, and the most dangerous witch of the House of Black crumbled to the floor. The line of Walburga and Cygnus ended, not with a whisper of ancient magic, but with the defiant roar of a woman who had nothing left to prove. While the duel raged in the Great Hall, another member of the Black family was engaged in a far more subtle and ultimately more consequential act of defiance. Narcissa Malfoy stood in the Forbidden Forest, watching Lord Voldemort cast the killing curse at Harry Potter. She was there not out of loyalty to the Dark Lord, but out of terror for her son. Her entire world had narrowed to the single goal of getting back into Hogwarts, of finding Draco. When Harry fell, Voldemort ordered Narcissa to check if the boy was dead. He could have chosen any of his Death Eaters. He chose Narcissa, believing her to be completely subservient. And here, the deep maternal love that had been twisted by pure blood ideology finally served the light. She felt Harry's pulse. She knew he was alive, and she lied. A single whispered word: dead. This lie, told by the most unlikely of heroes, was the keystone that collapsed Voldemort's entire edifice of power. Narcissa Malfoy, the last daughter of the House of Black to stand under the Dark Mark, chose her son over her master. She did not care for Harry. She did not care for the wizarding world. She cared for Draco. In that moment, the crippling obsession with purity that had driven the Black family for centuries was finally utterly rendered meaningless by the simple human love of a mother for her child. The war ended with the dawn. Voldemort was gone. Bellatrix was dead. Narcissa walked away from the battlefield with her son. Andromeda was left to raise her grandson in a world that had taken everything from her. The tapestry at 12 Grimmauld Place was a ruin of scorched holes and faded names. With the death of Nymphadora, the extinction of the male line through Sirius and Regulus, and the survival of only those who had rejected or diluted the name, the noble and most ancient House of Black had truly breathed its last. The name itself had become a relic of a forgotten war, a monument to an ideology that had finally consumed those who clung to it. The next chapter in this history, the final analysis of a broken family tree, is the chronicle of the extinction of a name. The Battle of Hogwarts ended with Bellatrix Lestrange falling to Molly Weasley's curse, her body crumbling into the stone floor of the Great Hall. And in the Forbidden Forest, Narcissa Malfoy spoke the lie that saved Harry Potter, choosing her son over her master. The war was over, but for the House of Black, the final chapter was just beginning. When the dust settled and the survivors began to count the cost, one question hung in the air like smoke from a spent wand. Why did the Black name vanish, while so many other pure blood names endured? The answer lies not in a single curse or a forgotten heir, but in the family's own warped ideology, a creed that demanded absolute purity and punished any deviation with exile. Consider the Malfoys. Lucius survived the war, Draco survived, and Narcissa survived. Their line continued because they were willing to bend, to compromise, to lie when it mattered most. The Malfoy name would carry on, tarnished but intact. The Weasleys, branded as blood traitors, not only survived but multiplied, their name spreading across the wizarding world like wildflowers. The Longbottoms, the Abbotts, the Greengrasses, all endured because they had children, because they adapted, because they refused to let their bloodline shrink into a dead end. But the Blacks had spent generations pruning their own tree. They burned out any branch that dared to marry a Muggle-born, or a blood traitor. They disowned sons who ran away, and daughters who fell in love with the wrong kind of wizard. They narrowed their line so severely that by the end of the 20th century, the entire family had collapsed into a handful of cousins, carrying the weight of a name that demanded everything and gave nothing in return. Sirius died without his defiance of the family ending with his own breath. Regulus died without children, his silent rebellion buried in a cave full of inferi. The male line of the noble and most ancient House of Black was extinct, and no heir remained to claim the legacy. And so the name itself, Black, became a ghost. It could not pass through the female line in the same way. Narcissa became a Malfoy, Andromeda became a Tonks, Bellatrix became a Lestrange. Their children bore those names, not the black of their mother's blood. Even Delphine, the secret daughter of Bellatrix and Lord Voldemort, would never be known as a Black in the official records. The tapestry at 12 Grimmauld Place had once shown the entire lineage, a magnificent web of golden threads connecting centuries of pure blood pride. But after the war, that tapestry was a ruin. Blasted patches marked where Walburga had torn out Andromeda, where she had burned away Sirius. The names of the dead, Regulus, Bellatrix, and even the long-forgotten squibs, were now just faded scars in the fabric. The final threads that remained led only to the living, Narcissa, Andromeda, and the scattered descendants who would never carry the surname again. The symbolic death of Toujours came when Harry Potter, the half-blood boy who had defeated Voldemort, inherited the ancestral home. He did not restore the family. He did not proudly hang the crest above the fireplace. Instead, he let the house sit empty, its curtains drawn, its portraits whispering to themselves. The motto that had driven the family for centuries, always pure, now sounded like a curse in an empty hall. The war had proven that purity was a lie. The Blacks had never been truly pure. They had only pretended, and their pretending had cost them everything. The ideology that demanded they marry cousins and shun the outside world had slowly strangled them, leaving them too few to survive. In the end, they were not destroyed by an enemy. They destroyed themselves. Standing in that dark, dusty drawing room after the final battle, one could almost feel the weight of what had been lost. The family tapestry hung there, a monument to 1,000 years of pride and prejudice. But it was no longer a living record. It was a museum piece, a fossil trapped in enchanted thread. The names that remained were not carriers of a future. They were tombstones for a past that had refused to change. And yet, blood does not simply vanish. The Black family's genetic legacy continues, hidden in the veins of those who bear other names. In a quiet house in the countryside, Andromeda Tonks raises her grandson Teddy Lupin, a boy with turquoise hair and the ability to change his face at will. He carries the Black blood through his grandmother, through his mother Nymphadora. But he will never be a Black. He is a Lupin, a Tonks, a child of the New World. And somewhere, in the shadows of time, a girl named Delphine grows up, unaware of the dark inheritance that pulses beneath her skin. She is the daughter of Bellatrix and Voldemort, a living paradox, the ultimate product of pure blood obsession and muggle-born hatred twisted into one. What does her existence mean for the future of the Black bloodline? Who will claim her, or will she claim herself? That is a story for another time. A story about the shadow of the Black bloodline and the two children who carry its weight in very different ways, the light of Teddy and the dark of Delphi. And so the name Black, once carved into the very foundations of wizarding aristocracy, faded into silence. The tapestry at 12 Grimmauld Place, that sprawling chronicle of gold thread and burning holes, finally had no new threads to add. The line of the noble and most ancient house, the bloodline that had boasted Toujours for centuries, reached its end not with a dramatic curse or a final battle cry, but with a quiet legal transfer of property to a boy who never wanted it. The name itself as a living entity ceased to exist, but names are not the same as blood, and blood, as the Blacks themselves knew all too well, has a way of persisting long after the title fades. The Black family's genetic legacy, their DNA, scattered like seeds in the wind across 3 surviving branches. 2 of these branches carried forward the name and the status, albeit diluted by marriage and time. The third, hidden in the shadows of prophecy and violence, carried the most dangerous concentration of all. First, there was the Malfoy line. Narcissa Black, the youngest of the 3 sisters, married into a family that shared her values of pure blood supremacy and social climbing. Lucius Malfoy was not a Black by name. But his lineage was deeply intertwined with the same old families, the same sacred 28. Their son, Draco, carried the black blood through his mother's veins, a quiet inheritance that would be passed to his own son, Scorpius. The Malfoy line, for all its post-war attempts at redemption and reintegration, remained the most visible continuation of the Black family's legacy in the wizarding world. They still had money, still had influence, still had a manor that stood as a monument to old power, but the ideology that had once driven the Blacks to burn their own relatives off the Tapestry had softened, diluted by survival and the shifting tides of a new world. The second branch, far more fragile and far more precious, was the Tonks line. Andromeda Black, who had been burned from the Tapestry for marrying the Muggle-born Ted Tonks, carried the black blood into a family of love and defiance. Her daughter, Nymphadora, was a metamorphmagus, a rare gift that echoed the family's magical intensity, but without the cruelty. And Nymphadora, in turn, married Remus Lupin, a werewolf, a creature despised by the very pure blood circles she had rejected. Their union was the ultimate repudiation of the Black family's core beliefs, and from that union came Teddy Lupin, a child born in the shadow of war, orphaned before he could speak a word. Teddy was the grandson of Andromeda, the great-grandson of the House of Black, but the name he carried was Lupin, not Black. He was the living synthesis of the family's potential for light, a child of love, of sacrifice, of reconciliation. His very existence proved that the black blood could create something beautiful, something free from the poison of purity. But there was a third branch, one that the wizarding world did not know about for many years, a branch that was not carried through marriage or love, but through violence and obsession, a branch that existed in the silence between Bellatrix Lestrange's fanatical devotion to Lord Voldemort and the Dark Lord's own twisted quest for immortality. This was the branch of Delphine, or Delphi, the secret daughter of Bellatrix Black and Tom Riddle. Bellatrix had been the most loyal of Voldemort's followers, not just a Death Eater but a true believer, a woman who saw him as the embodiment of pure blood destiny. In the months after the fall of the Ministry, in the chaos of the Second War, she had given him something no one else could, a child. The Dark Lord, who had rejected his own Muggle father and sought to conquer death, had fathered an heir, but Delphi was not named, not acknowledged, not even known to most of Voldemort's inner circle. She was hidden, raised by a devoted servant, a living secret that would only surface years after the war ended. Delphi was the ultimate irony of the Black family's bloodline. She was the product of a union between the purest of pure blood lines, the Blacks and the Slytherin line, through Voldemort. But she was also the product of a man who despised his own humanity. Her existence was a contradiction. She carried the Black name's obsession with purity, but she also carried the curse of being the daughter of a monster. In the years after the Second Wizarding War, when Delphi emerged, she sought to complete her father's work, to resurrect the Dark Lord, to claim her birthright. She was a shadow, a dark echo of the family's worst tendencies. And yet, in a strange way, she was also the last true Black in terms of pure ideology. She believed in the supremacy, in the destiny, in the need to erase the impure. She was Bellatrix's child, and Bellatrix had been the most fanatical Black of them all. So the bloodline of the House of Black did not simply end with Sirius's fall through the veil. It fractured into three paths: the Malfoys, who carried the name into a future of cautious neutrality; the Lupins, who carried the hope of redemption; and Delphi, who carried the ghost of the family's darkest ambitions. Teddy Lupin, growing up under the care of his grandmother Andromeda and his godfather Harry Potter, represented the choice the Black family never made. He was a metamorphmagus like his mother, able to change his appearance at will, a literal embodiment of transformation. He had no attachment to the old tapestries, the old hatreds. He was the child of a werewolf and a metamorphmagus, the grandson of a Muggle-born and a pure-blood rebel. His DNA was a mosaic of everything the Black family had tried to burn away. And yet, That same DNA made him powerful in ways the old family could never have understood. He could blend, he could change, he could choose who he wanted to be. He was not bound by Toujours, he was bound by love. The shadow of the black bloodline falls across two heirs, one hidden in darkness, one living in the light. Delphi, the daughter of Bellatrix and Voldemort, is the legacy of what happens when obsession with purity becomes a religion. Teddy, the son of Nymphadora and Remus, is the legacy of what happens when the blood is allowed to mix, to heal, to grow beyond its origins. One is a ghost of the past, a lingering whisper of the tapestry's worst threads. The other is a promise of a future where the name no longer matters. The House of Black as a name is extinct, but the blood continues, flowing through the veins of a boy who can change his face, and a girl who would resurrect the darkest wizard in history. In that contrast lies the truest story of the family. They were never just about purity. They were about the choices their descendants would make, and those choices, made long after the last portrait at Grimmauld Place fell silent, would determine whether the Black legacy would become a curse or a blessing. The chapter closes on a quiet room in the Lupin cottage, where a grandmother watches her grandson change his hair from bright blue to soft brown, laughing at something only he can see. And in another place, a hidden corridor, a woman with silver white hair and unnerving calm holds a wand, dreaming of a resurrection she was born to complete. The shadow stretches long, but it is no longer the only thing that remains. This is the inheritance of the Black family. Not a name, not a motto, but a living choice repeated in every generation. And the last two bearers of that blood have already made theirs. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.